He's a tech millionaire who's never been with a woman. She's a maid with a devastating secret. When his father offers her $100,000 to disappear forever, will their fragile connection survive the ultimate betrayal? You won't believe what happens next. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The fierce waves crashed against the jagged rocks below the massive glass windows of Seacliff Manor. Julian Wexler stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his tall figure a dark silhouette against the stormy Maine coastline. At 29, he had everything money could buy, but nothing his heart truly wanted. "Mr. Wexler?" Mrs. Finch, his elderly housekeeper, appeared at the doorway of his study. "The new maid has arrived for her interview." Julian didn't turn around. "Send her in, then leave us." Mrs. Finch hesitated. "Sir, are you sure you want to conduct the interview yourself? I could—" "That will be all, Mrs. Finch," Julian said, his British accent crisp and formal. When the door closed, Julian finally turned. His dark brown skin contrasted with the stark white of his perfectly pressed shirt. His face, handsome but unsmiling, betrayed nothing of the anxiety building inside him at the thought of meeting someone new. A soft knock on the door broke the silence. "Enter," he called out, straightening his posture even more. The young woman who walked in wasn't what Julian expected. Her natural hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she wore simple jeans and a blue blouse, casual but respectable, but it was her eyes that caught him off guard. Warm, intelligent, and somehow both strong and vulnerable at the same time. "Nia Harper," she said, extending her hand with confidence that Julian found surprising. Most people were intimidated by him. "Thank you for seeing me." Julian hesitated before shaking her hand, the brief contact sending an unexpected jolt through him. He quickly withdrew. "Please sit, Ms. Harper," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk as he took his own seat. "Your references are adequate. Mrs. Finch is getting older and needs help maintaining the house." Nia nodded, taking in the massive study with its wall-to-wall bookshelves and expensive furnishings. "It's a beautiful home." "It's a house," Julian corrected, looking down at her resume. "Your previous employer in Brooklyn gave you a glowing recommendation. Why leave New York for Maine?" Something flickered across Nia's face, pain perhaps, before she composed herself. "I needed a fresh start." Julian recognized the look. It was the same one he saw in the mirror every morning. "The position includes room and board," he continued. "All business. Your quarters would be in the East Wing. This is a private residence and I value my solitude. I work from home most days and expect not to be disturbed." "I understand," Nia said, meeting his gaze directly. "I'm not one to pry, Mr. Wexler." For some reason, Julian believed her. "You'd start immediately." "That works for me," Nia said, then added with a small smile, "I've been living out of a suitcase at the Ocean View Motel for a week. I'm ready for something more permanent." Julian's eyebrow raised slightly. "May I ask what brings someone from Brooklyn all the way to coastal Maine with just a suitcase?" Nia's smile faded. "Same thing that brings most people to new places, running from something old." The honesty of her answer surprised him. Most people tried to impress him with lies. "Very well, Ms. Harper, you're hired." Julian stood abruptly, signaling the end of the interview. "Mrs. Finch will show you to your quarters and explain your duties." Nia stood as well, smoothing her jeans. "Thank you for the opportunity." As she turned to leave, Julian felt a strange urge to say something more, something less formal, but the words stuck in his throat as they always did. Instead, he watched her walk away, noticing the slight slump in her shoulders that spoke of burdens too heavy to carry. When the door closed behind her, Julian returned to the window. The storm outside was intensifying, much like the unsettling feeling in his chest. Nia followed Mrs. Finch through the enormous house, trying not to gape at the luxury surrounding her. Crystal chandeliers, original artwork, and antique furniture that probably cost more than she'd make in a lifetime. "Mr. Wexler is very particular," Mrs. Finch explained as they walked. The older woman moved slowly, her arthritis clearly causing her pain. "He likes things just so. Breakfast at 7, lunch at noon if he's home, dinner at 6:30 sharp. He doesn't like to be disturbed in his study or bedroom." "Does he have family that visits?" Nia asked. Mrs. Finch's expression darkened. "His father calls occasionally but hasn't visited in years, thank the Lord. Mr. Wexler doesn't have friends over either. It's just him." "Sounds lonely," Nia murmured. "Not our place to judge, dear," Mrs. Finch said, but her eyes softened. "Though between us, I worry about him. Too young to be so alone." They reached a door at the end of a hallway. "Here's your room. It's not fancy, but it's comfortable." Comfortable was an understatement. The room was bigger than Nia's entire apartment in Brooklyn, with a queen-sized bed, private bathroom, and even a small sitting area with a TV. "This is for me?" Nia asked in disbelief. Mrs. Finch nodded. "Mr. Wexler may be particular, but he's fair. Get settled in. Your duties start tomorrow." After Mrs. Finch left, Nia sat on the edge of the bed and finally let the tears come. She'd been holding them back for weeks, ever since finding Marcus in bed with her cousin just 3 months before their wedding. The betrayal had been bad enough, but the stress had led to her miscarriage a week later. The baby she'd never told Marcus about, the baby she'd already loved. Nia wiped her eyes. "New place, new start," she whispered to herself, the mantra she'd been repeating since leaving Brooklyn. She was done crying over people who didn't deserve her tears. Julian couldn't sleep. Again. He paced his bedroom, the sound of the storm still raging outside. His mind kept drifting to the new maid, Nia. There was something about her that unsettled him, not in a threatening way, but in a way that made him too aware of himself. Growing up as the only son of businessman Richard Wexler had been a lesson in emotional austerity. "Wexler men don't show weakness," his father would say. After his mother left when he was 8, returning to England without even saying goodbye, Julian had built walls around himself that no one had ever breached. His father had shaped him into his image, brilliant, driven, and utterly alone. The prestigious British boarding schools had only reinforced his isolation. By the time Julian graduated from Oxford and moved to America to start his tech company, he had mastered the art of keeping people at a distance. His company's success had made him millions by the time he was 25, but the scars from his childhood remained. The incident during his final year at boarding school had been the final blow, cementing his fear of intimacy and vulnerability. Julian stopped pacing and pressed his palms against the cool glass of his bedroom window. Below, the ocean churned violently, mirroring the turmoil inside him. "Get it together," he muttered to himself. "She's just the help." But even as he said it, Julian knew Nia Harper was more than that. She was a threat to his carefully constructed solitude. The next morning, Nia reported to the kitchen at 6 a.m., determined to prove herself. Mrs. Finch was already there, showing her where everything was kept. "Mr. Wexler likes his tea steeped exactly 3 minutes," the older woman explained. "Earl Grey in the morning, green tea in the afternoon, never coffee." Nia absorbed all the details, from Julian's preference for the crusts cut off his toast, to which cleaning products to use on which surfaces. By the time she prepared his breakfast tray at 7, she felt ready. "I'll take it to him," Nia offered, seeing how Mrs. Finch winced when she bent to check the oven. "He doesn't like changes to routine," Mrs. Finch warned. "Well, he'll have to get used to me eventually," Nia said with a gentle smile. "Rest your legs. I can handle Mr. Wexler." "Mrs." Finch looked doubtful but nodded. "He'll be in the dining room." Nia carried the tray through the house, rehearsing a polite greeting in her mind. She found Julian seated at one end of a massive dining table, reading something on his tablet. He wore another immaculate shirt, this one pale blue that complemented his dark skin. His closely cropped hair was perfectly neat, and his posture remained as rigid as it had been during their interview. "Good morning, Mr. Wexler," Nia said, setting down the tray. "I hope you slept well." Julian looked up, surprise briefly flashing across his face before his expression returned to its usual mask. "Where is Mrs. Finch?" "Resting her arthritis," Nia replied honestly. "I offered to bring your breakfast." Julian stared at her for a moment, then nodded slightly. "Very well." As Nia arranged his breakfast, she could feel his eyes on her, watching her every move. Not in a creepy way, but in the cautious manner of someone unused to change. "Is there anything else you need, sir?" she asked when she finished. Julian shook his head, still watching her. "No, thank you." Nia turned to leave, but something made her pause. "The storm broke overnight. It's a beautiful morning. Might be nice to eat with a view." Julian's brow furrowed. "I always eat here." "Of course," Nia said with a small nod. "Enjoy your breakfast." As she left the dining room, Nia felt Julian's eyes still on her. There was something in them, not anger at her suggestion, but something almost like fear. Over the next 2 weeks, Nia settled into life at Seacliff Manor. She learned its rhythms and quirks, which floorboards creaked, how the sea air made the windows stick, which rooms Julian avoided completely. The East Wing guest rooms, she noticed, always remained closed, though she dusted them weekly as instructed. Julian remained formal but not unkind. He spoke little, answering her questions with as few words as possible, but sometimes Nia would catch him watching her when he thought she wouldn't notice. One afternoon, as Nia dusted the bookshelves in his study while he worked, she began humming softly, an old habit she hadn't even realized she was doing until Julian spoke. "What song is that?" he asked, not looking up from his computer. Nia stopped, embarrassed. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to disturb you." "You didn't," Julian said, finally glancing up. "I was just curious." "It's an old song my grandmother used to sing," Nia explained. "Something about finding light in dark places." Julian nodded, then returned to his work. But Nia noticed his typing had stopped, and he seemed to be listening as she resumed her humming, softer now. That evening, as she folded laundry in the utility room, Nia heard piano music drifting through the house. Following the sound, she found herself outside the music room, a place she hadn't yet been instructed to clean. Through the partially open door, she saw Julian at a grand piano, his fingers moving skillfully over the keys. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, filled with a longing that made Nia's heart ache. She stood transfixed, watching his usually rigid posture soften as he played. When the piece ended, Julian sat motionless for a moment. Then, without turning around, he said, "You can come in, Miss Harper." Startled, Nia pushed the door open. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to spy. The music was beautiful." "Chopin," Julian said, still looking at the keys. "My mother taught me before she left." It was the most personal thing he'd ever shared with her. Nia took a tentative step forward. "You play wonderfully." Julian closed the piano lid gently. "It's just muscle memory now." But Nia knew it was more than that. She'd heard the emotion in every note. "Would you like me to leave this room on my cleaning schedule?" she asked. Julian finally looked at her, his expression unreadable. "No, this room stays as it is." He stood abruptly. "Excuse me." As he brushed past her, Nia caught a glimpse of something raw in his eyes, a pain so deep it stole her breath. A week later, Nia was changing sheets in Julian's bedroom when she noticed a photo on his nightstand, the only personal item in the otherwise Spartan room. It showed a beautiful black woman with a small boy, both smiling on a beach. The woman had the same warm brown eyes as Julian. "That's private." Nia jumped at Julian's voice behind her. She hadn't heard him enter. "I'm sorry," she said, quickly putting the photo down. "I was just making the bed." Julian crossed the room and picked up the photo, looking at it with an expression Nia couldn't decipher. "My mother," he said after a moment. "The summer before she left." Nia's heart clenched. "She looks kind." "She was," Julian said softly, "until she wasn't." He set the photo down and turned to Nia, his mask back in place. "Please finish up quickly, I need to work." "Of course," Nia said, hurrying to complete her task. But as she left, she couldn't shake the image of that little boy's smile, so different from the man who now lived behind walls of his own making. That night, Nia couldn't sleep. Her thoughts kept returning to Julian, his music, his pain, the photo of his mother. There was so much more to him than his cold exterior suggested. Deciding a cup of tea might help, she made her way to the kitchen. The house was dark and quiet, with only the sound of the ocean in the distance. As she approached the kitchen, however, she saw a light was already on. Julian sat at the kitchen island, staring into a cup of what looked like untouched tea. He wore pajama pants and a t-shirt, the most casual she'd ever seen him. Without his usual formal attire, he looked younger, more vulnerable. Nia cleared her throat softly so as not to startle him. "Couldn't sleep either." Julian looked up, surprise crossing his features. "Ms. Harper." "Please, call me Nia," she said, entering the kitchen. "It's strange to be so formal at 2 in the morning." A ghost of a smile touched Julian's lips. "Nia, then." She moved to the kettle. "Mind if I make some tea?" Julian gestured to the kettle. "Help yourself." As Nia prepared her tea, a comfortable silence fell between them. It felt different than their usual interactions, less guarded somehow. "Nightmares?" she asked gently, taking a seat across from him. Julian's eyes snapped to hers, suddenly defensive. "Why would you ask that?" "Because that's why I'm awake," Nia admitted. "I still have them about what happened back in Brooklyn." Julian studied her for a long moment. "You never said what that was." Nia wrapped her hands around her warm mug. "No, I didn't." Another silence stretched between them, but this one felt like an invitation rather than a barrier. "I was engaged," Nia finally said, the words coming easier in the quiet darkness of the night. "Found my fiancé in bed with my cousin 3 months before the wedding." Julian winced. "I'm sorry." Nia nodded, taking a sip of her tea. The worst part wasn't even the betrayal, it was what happened after. She paused, wondering if she should continue, then decided she needed to say it aloud to someone. "I was pregnant. The stress, I lost the baby the following week. Julian's eyes widened with genuine shock. Nia, it's okay, she said quickly. You don't need to say anything, it's just, that's why I left. Too many ghosts in Brooklyn. Julian nodded slowly, understanding in his eyes. Then, surprising her, he spoke. My nightmares are always the same. I'm 8 years old again, running through our London house looking for my mother, but all I find is a note saying she couldn't live this life anymore. The pain in his voice made Nia's heart ache. That must have been terrible for a child. My father told me to stop crying. Julian continued, his eyes distant. Said Wexler men don't show weakness. That's the last time I cried. Everyone needs to cry sometimes, Nia said softly. Julian looked at her, really looked at her as if seeing something new. Not everyone has that luxury. They sat in silence again, two wounded souls finding unexpected connection in the quiet hours of the night. Finally, Julian stood. We should try to sleep. Morning comes regardless of our demons. Nia nodded and rose as well. As they walked through the darkened house, she felt a shift between them. Something fundamental had changed. At the stairs where they would part ways, she to the east wing, he to the master suite, Julian paused. Thank you, he said, so quietly she almost didn't hear. For what? For sharing your ghosts with me, he replied. It makes mine feel less lonely. Before Nia could respond, Julian turned and disappeared up the stairs, leaving her standing there with a strange warmth spreading through her chest. The next morning, Julian acted as if their middle-of-the-night conversation had never happened. He was back to his formal self, barely speaking during breakfast. But Nia noticed small changes, the way his eyes lingered on her a moment longer than necessary, how he seemed to listen when she hummed while working. A week later, Mrs. Finch announced she needed to visit her sister, who had fallen ill. I'll be gone for at least 2 weeks, she told Nia worriedly. Are you sure you can manage everything? Of course, Nia assured her. You focus on your sister. Mr. Wexler and I will be fine. After Mrs. Finch left, the house felt different, quieter but somehow more charged. It was just Nia and Julian now, with no buffer between them. That evening, as Nia served dinner, Julian surprised her. Would you care to join me? He asked, gesturing to the seat beside him. Nia blinked in surprise. Join you for dinner? There's plenty of food, Julian said, looking slightly uncomfortable with his own invitation. And it seems ridiculous for you to eat alone in the kitchen now that Mrs. Finch is gone. Yes, thank you, Nia said, recovering from her surprise. She returned to the kitchen for another place setting, her heart beating faster than it should. Dinner began awkwardly, with Julian clearly unused to making conversation. But gradually, as Nia asked about his work, things eased between them. So your company creates security software? She asked. Julian nodded. Among other things, we specialize in protecting people's privacy online. That's important work, Nia said, though I'm not sure I have much privacy left to protect after spending years on social media. A small smile touched Julian's lips. You'd be surprised what companies know about you. Is that why you don't have any social media accounts? Nia asked. I looked you up when I applied for the job, she admitted when he raised an eyebrow. Partly, Julian said. I also don't see the point in sharing my life with strangers. Or with anyone, Nia observed gently. Julian met her eyes, and for once he didn't look away. Not until recently. The implication hung between them, neither acknowledging it directly, but Nia felt it. A door opening just a crack in the walls around Julian Wexler. The following days established a new routine. They would have breakfast separately, with Julian working in his study most of the day while Nia handled the household tasks. But dinner they shared, their conversations gradually becoming easier, more natural. Julian began asking about her life in Brooklyn, her grandmother who raised her job as an administrative assistant at a non-profit, her dreams of someday opening a small bookstore cafe. In turn, Nia learned about Julian's time at Oxford, his early success in tech, and his decision to move to the isolated Maine coast. People are exhausting, he explained one evening, always wanting something from you. Not everyone has an agenda, Nia countered. Julian gave her a skeptical look. In my experience, they do. What about me? Nia challenged. What's my agenda? Julian studied her for a long moment. That's what makes you dangerous, he finally said. I haven't figured it out yet. Nia laughed, the sound bright in the formal dining room. Maybe my evil plan is to get you to eat dinner at a normal hour and occasionally smile. And remarkably, Julian did smile then, a real one that transformed his face and made Nia's breath catch. One rainy afternoon, Nia found Julian in the library staring out the window at the stormy sea. "I brought you some tea," she said, setting down the cup. "Thank you," Julian replied, but he didn't turn from the window. Nia hesitated, sensing something was wrong. "Is everything okay?" Julian was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then, "My father called. He's coming to visit next week." The tension in Julian's shoulders told Nia all she needed to know about his relationship with his father. "I see," she said carefully. "Will he be staying here?" Julian nodded, his jaw tight. "Unfortunately." "I'll prepare the guest room in the west wing," Nia said. "No," Julian said quickly. "Put him in the east wing, as far from my room as possible." Nia nodded, understanding. "I'll take care of it." She turned to leave, but Julian's voice stopped her. "Nia?" "Yes?" "My father is difficult," Julian said, finally turning to face her. "He'll likely be rude to you. Please don't take it personally." The concern in his eyes touched something deep inside Nia. "I've dealt with difficult people before. Not like Richard Wexler," Julian said grimly. "He makes difficult people look like amateurs." Nia crossed the room to stand beside Julian at the window. "Then it's a good thing you're not alone this time." Julian looked down at her, something unreadable in his expression. For a moment, Nia thought he might reach out to her. Instead, he simply nodded, but the gratitude in his eyes said everything. The night before Richard Wexler's arrival, Nia found Julian in the music room, playing the piano more intensely than she'd ever heard. The music was angry, almost violent, so different from his usual measured control. She waited until he finished before speaking. "That wasn't Chopin." Julian looked up, slightly breathless. "Beethoven, more suited to my mood." Nia entered the room and sat on the bench beside him, closer than she'd ever been. She could smell his cologne, something subtle and expensive. "You're worried about tomorrow," she said. It wasn't a question. Julian's fingers ghosted over the keys without pressing them. "My father has a way of undoing years of progress in minutes. He can only affect you if you let him," Nia said gently. Julian gave her a sad smile. "Easier said than done when someone knows exactly where all your scars are, because they put them there." Without thinking, Nia placed her hand over his on the piano keys. Julian froze, looking down at their hands with an expression of shock. Nia realized her mistake and began to pull away, but Julian turned his hand to catch hers. His touch was hesitant, almost fearful, but he didn't let go. "I'm sorry," Nia whispered. "I didn't mean to—" "Don't be," Julian interrupted, his voice rough with emotion. He stared at their joined hands as if they were something miraculous and terrifying. "It's been a very long time since anyone has touched me like this." The vulnerability in his confession broke Nia's heart. How lonely must his life have been? They sat in silence, hands still joined on the piano keys, neither willing to break the fragile connection between them. Finally, Julian spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I should tell you something about why I am the way I am." "You don't have to explain yourself to me," Nia said. "I want to," Julian insisted, "before my father arrives and twists everything." He took a deep breath. "In my final year at boarding school, there was a girl. She seemed interested in me. No one had ever been interested before. I was always too serious, too focused on my studies." Julian's hand trembled slightly in hers, but he continued. "We became close. I thought she cared for me, but it was all a game. Her brother had bet her she couldn't get the uptight scholarship boy to fall for her. The night I finally worked up the courage to kiss her, they had hidden cameras. The video of me, awkward, inexperienced, making a fool of myself, was shown to the entire school the next day." Nia felt sick. "Julian, that's horrible." The humiliation was— Julian shook his head, unable to finish. "My father's response was that I should have known better than to trust anyone, that I deserved it for being weak." "Your father was wrong," Nia said firmly. "Those people were cruel, and you didn't deserve any of it." Julian finally looked at her, his eyes filled with a pain that had never fully healed. "After that, it seemed easier not to try, not to risk it. My work doesn't judge me or laugh at me or leave me. Is that why you've never—" Nia trailed off, realizing she was overstepping. "Never been with anyone?" Julian finished for her. "Yes, hard to be intimate with someone when you can't bear to be vulnerable." The admission hung between them, raw and honest in a way nothing else had been. Slowly, carefully, Nia raised her free hand and, after giving Julian time to pull away, gently touched his cheek. His sharp intake of breath was the only sound in the room. "Not everyone will hurt you," she whispered. Julian closed his eyes, leaning almost imperceptibly into her touch. "I'm starting to believe that might be true." The moment stretched between them, delicate and precious. Then Julian opened his eyes, and slowly pulled back, though he didn't release her other hand. "It's late," he said softly, "and tomorrow will be challenging." Nia nodded, understanding his need to retreat. She stood, reluctantly letting their hands part. "Good night, Julian." As she reached the door, his voice stopped her. "Nia?" She turned back. "Yes, thank you," he said simply. Nia smiled. "Anytime." As she made her way back to her room, Nia's mind was spinning. The touch of Julian's hand, the trust he'd shown in sharing his past. It all meant something she wasn't ready to name, but her heart knew, even if her mind wasn't ready to admit it. In his music room, Julian remained at the piano, looking down at the hand Nia had held. For the first time in years, he felt something other than emptiness or pain. He felt hope. The next morning dawned bright and clear, at odds with the tension filling Seacliff Manor. Julian was up earlier than usual, dressed in one of his most expensive suits, armor for the battle ahead. Nia found him in the kitchen, making his own tea, something he never did. "Couldn't wait?" she asked, trying to keep her tone light. Julian looked up, his expression closed off once more, though something softened when he saw her. "Couldn't sleep?" "I can make breakfast," Nia offered. "I'm not hungry," Julian said, then added, "But thank you." The formality was back, but Nia understood. Julian was preparing himself for his father's arrival. At precisely 10 o'clock, the sound of tires on gravel announced Richard Wexler's arrival. Julian went to meet him at the door, his posture rigid. Nia stayed in the background, watching as a chauffeur opened the car door. Richard Wexler emerged, tall and imposing, with grey at his temples and the same sharp features as his son. But where Julian's eyes held hidden warmth, Richard's were cold and calculating. "Julian," Richard said by way of greeting, his British accent even more pronounced than his son's. "Still hiding away in this mausoleum, I see." "Father," Julian replied stiffly. "Welcome to Seacliff." Richard's eyes scanned the foyer before landing on Nia. "And who is this?" Before Julian could answer, Nia stepped forward. "Nia Harper, sir. I'm the housekeeper." Richard's eyebrow raised as he assessed her. At least you've hired someone presentable this time. That old woman was an eyesore." Julian's jaw tightened. "Mrs. Finch has been with me since I moved here. She's visiting family." Richard waved his hand dismissively. "Show me to my room. I need to freshen up before we discuss why I'm here." As Julian led his father upstairs, he glanced back at Nia with an apologetic look. She gave him a reassuring smile, but inside, her stomach churned. Richard Wexler's presence filled the house like a toxic cloud, and they'd barely exchanged 10 sentences. The worst, Nia suspected, was yet to come. Dinner that evening was a masterclass in tension. Nia had prepared Richard's favorite meal, as Julian had instructed, beef Wellington with roasted vegetables and a rich red wine sauce. The elder Wexler sat at the head of the table, Julian to his right, the empty chair to his left, a glaring reminder of Julian's solitude. "The food is adequate," Richard said after his first few bites, "though the sauce lacks depth." Julian said nothing, cutting his meat with precise movements, his eyes fixed on his plate. Nia, who stood near the kitchen door in case anything was needed, felt a flash of irritation. She'd spent hours on that sauce. "Will there be anything else, Mr. Wexler?" she asked, keeping her voice professionally neutral. Richard glanced up as if surprised she was still there. "No, you can go." "Thank you, Nia," Julian added quietly, meeting her eyes briefly. She nodded and retreated to the kitchen, but left the door ajar so she could hear their conversation. Something about Richard Wexler made her uneasy, beyond his obvious rudeness. "So," Richard was saying, "have you considered my proposal?" Julian took a sip of water. "I've told you repeatedly, I'm not interested in selling the company." "Don't be stubborn, Julian," Richard said, his tone condescending. 10 Corp's offer is more than generous. You could retire completely at 29, isn't that what you want? More time for whatever it is you do here in isolation? "What I want," Julian replied evenly, "is to maintain control of the company I built. The work matters to me," Richard scoffed. "The work, always the work with you. When are you going to start living an actual life? Find a suitable woman? Continue the family name?" Julian's knife scraped against his plate. "My personal life is not up for discussion." "You don't have a personal life," Richard shot back. "That's the problem. Do you know what people say about you in London? The reclusive genius who's never been seen with a woman. There are rumors, Julian." "I don't care about rumors," Julian said, but Nia could hear the tension in his voice. "Well, I do," Richard snapped. "The Wexler name means something in our circles. Your peculiarities, reflect poorly on the family. Julian set down his utensils, his appetite clearly gone. Is that why you're really here? To lecture me about family reputation? I'm here because you're throwing away the opportunity of a lifetime, Richard said. TenCorp doesn't just want your company, they want you. A leadership position, public recognition. You could finally be something more than a hermit coding in a mansion by the sea. I'm exactly what I want to be, Julian replied coldly. Richard laughed, the sound harsh and mocking. No one wants to be alone, Julian. You're hiding, not living. The silence that followed was deafening. Nia held her breath, waiting for Julian's response. I think I've lost my appetite, Julian finally said. If you'll excuse me. Nia quickly moved away from the door as Julian emerged from the dining room, his face a controlled mask that didn't quite hide the storm in his eyes. He paused when he saw her. I'm sorry you had to hear that, he said quietly. Don't apologize for him, Nia replied, keeping her voice low. Julian's eyes softened slightly. I'll be in my study. Please see that my father has everything he needs. After Julian disappeared down the hallway, Nia returned to the dining room to clear the plates. Richard was finishing his wine, looking smug despite the failed conversation. Will there be dessert, sir? Nia asked, collecting Julian's barely touched meal. Richard looked her up and down in a way that made her skin crawl. Tell me, Miss Harper, how long have you worked for my son? About a month now, Nia answered, keeping her tone professional. And how do you find him as an employer? Nia met Richard's calculating gaze. Mr. Wexler is fair and respectful. Is he? Richard swirled his wine. Interesting. Most people find him cold and unapproachable. Perhaps they don't take the time to look beneath the surface, Nia suggested, before she could stop herself. Richard's eyebrows shot up. My. Rather defensive of your employer, aren't you? Nia felt heat rise to her cheeks, but kept her expression neutral. I simply believe in giving credit where it's due. Richard studied her with renewed interest. Well, Miss Harper, I think I will have dessert after all, and perhaps you could tell me more about my son's hidden depths. The way he said it made it clear he was mocking her, but Nia simply nodded. I'll bring dessert right away, sir. As she served Richard his dessert, a crème brûlée that had taken her 3 attempts to perfect, Nia chose her words carefully. Your son has built an impressive company, she said. I may not understand all the technical aspects, but I know his work protects people's privacy. That seems valuable in today's world. Richard tapped his spoon against the caramelized sugar, breaking through with a sharp crack. Business success isn't everything, Ms. Harper. A man needs more in his life. I'm sure Mr. Wexler will find whatever he needs when he's ready, Nia replied. Richard's eyes narrowed. You seem quite invested in my son's welfare for someone who's only been employed here a month. Nia felt a chill run down her spine at his tone. I respect him, she said simply. Well, Richard said, pushing away his half-eaten dessert, respect doesn't warm a bed at night. My son needs to stop hiding and start living, preferably with a woman of suitable background and connections. Nia clenched her jaw to keep from responding. She'd never met a man so coldly calculating about his own son's happiness. Will there be anything else, sir? She asked, eager to end the conversation. That will be all. Richard dismissed her with a wave of his hand. Oh, and Miss Harper? Remember your place in this household. My son may tolerate familiarity from the help, but I assure you it won't serve you well in the long run. The threat was thinly veiled, but Nia understood it perfectly. Richard Wexler had noticed something between her and Julian, and he didn't approve. Later that night, unable to sleep, Nia wandered to the kitchen for tea. She was surprised to find Julian already there, staring out the window at the moonlit ocean. Can't sleep? She asked softly. Julian turned, and in the dim light his face looked younger, more vulnerable. My father has that effect. Nia moved to the kettle. Tea? Julian nodded, and they fell into their now familiar nighttime routine. When Nia placed a steaming mug in front of him, their fingers brushed briefly, sending a small shock through her. I'm sorry about dinner, Julian said after a moment. You have nothing to apologize for, Nia insisted, taking the seat across from him. Julian's mouth curved in a humorless smile. My father would disagree. According to him, I have many things to apologize for, chief among them, my failure to live up to the Wexler name. What does that even mean? Nia asked. Julian sighed, wrapping his hands around the warm mug. To be a proper Wexler man, apparently I should be ruthlessly ambitious, socially prominent, and married to someone who enhances the family status. That sounds exhausting, Nia said, earning a genuine, if small, smile from Julian. It is, he agreed. which is why I choose to live here, away from all that." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the moonlight casting silvery patterns on the kitchen floor. "He asked about you," Julian said suddenly, "after you left to prepare dessert." Nia tensed slightly. "Oh? Wanted to know where I found you? Your background?" Julian's jaw tightened. He has a way of making even innocent questions sound invasive. "What did you tell him?" Nia asked, curious despite herself. "That your employment history is exemplary, and your personal life is none of his business," Julian replied. Nia felt warmth spread through her chest at his defense of her privacy. "Thank you." Julian looked at her intently. "My father is perceptive in his own way. He's likely noticed that our relationship is—" He trailed off, searching for the right word. "Friendly," Nia supplied, though it felt inadequate for the connection growing between them. "Yes," Julian said, though his eyes suggested he also found the word insufficient. "He won't approve." "Because I'm the help?" Nia asked, trying to keep her tone light despite the sting of the words. Julian's expression softened. "Because you make me question the walls I've built. My father believes those walls are necessary." The honesty in his voice took Nia's breath away. "And what do you believe?" Julian held her gaze, something shifting in his eyes. "I'm beginning to wonder if there might be something worth the risk of lowering them, for the right person." Nia's heart pounded in her chest. They were no longer talking in hypotheticals, and they both knew it. "Julian," she began, not sure what she wanted to say, but feeling the need to say something. Before she could continue, footsteps sounded in the hallway. They both tensed as Richard Wexler appeared in the doorway, wearing an expensive silk robe. "Well, isn't this cozy?" he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Midnight tea with the help, Julian?" Julian stood, his vulnerable expression instantly replaced by the cold mask he wore around his father. "Nia is having trouble sleeping, as am I. There's nothing inappropriate about sharing the kitchen." Richard's eyes moved between them, calculating. "Of course not, though perhaps Miss Harper could make her tea and take it back to her quarters. I need to discuss some private matters with you." Nia took the dismissal for what it was. "Good night, Mr. Wexler," she said to Julian, deliberately ignoring Richard. "I hope you sleep well." As she left the kitchen, she heard Richard's voice, low and warning. "You're playing with fire, Julian. Don't think I don't see what's happening here." Nia hurried back to her room, her tea forgotten. Richard Wexler was clearly a threat, not just to her job, but to the fragile connection blossoming between her and Julian. The next morning, Nia was polishing the silver in the dining room when Richard entered, dressed for business in an expensive suit. "Ah, Miss Harper," he said, his tone falsely pleasant. "Just the person I wanted to see." Nia set down the serving spoon she'd been polishing. "How can I help you, sir?" Richard pulled out a chair and sat, gesturing for her to do the same. When she hesitated, he smiled thinly. "Please, I insist." Reluctantly, Nia sat across from him, her back straight, hands folded in her lap. "I've been doing some checking into your background," Richard said without preamble. Nia's stomach dropped. "I don't see how that's appropriate, sir." Richard waved off her objection. "Anything that concerns my son concerns me. You understand." When Nia remained silent, he continued. "Brooklyn administrative assistant, broken engagement, all very ordinary. But what intrigues me is why someone like you would come all the way to Maine for a housekeeping position." "As I told your son during my interview, I needed a fresh start," Nia replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Yes, fresh starts. We all need those occasionally." Richard leaned forward. "Let me be direct, Miss Harper. I've seen how my son looks at you, and I'm concerned." "Mr. Wexler treats me with professional respect," Nia said carefully. Richard laughed, the sound cold and humorless. "Please spare me. Julian may be socially awkward, but he's still a man, and you're an attractive young woman who's managed to get closer to him in a month than anyone has in years." Nia felt her cheeks flush with anger. "If you're implying something inappropriate—" "I'm not implying anything," Richard interrupted. "I'm stating facts. Julian has spent his entire adult life avoiding emotional entanglements. Then suddenly you appear, and he's having midnight tea parties and defending your honor. Your son is a grown man," Nia pointed out, struggling to maintain her composure. "His personal relationships are his business." "Ah, so you admit there is a personal relationship?" Richard pounced on her words. Nia realized her mistake too late. "That's not what I meant." "Let me make something very clear," Richard said, all pretense of pleasantness gone. "Julian has opportunities right now that could secure the Wexler legacy for generations. I will not allow him to throw that away for some dalliance with the help." The contempt in his voice made Nia's blood boil. With all due respect, sir, you don't control your son's life. Richard's eyes hardened. Don't I? Who do you think funded his first company? Who opened doors for him in Silicon Valley? Julian may pretend to be self-made, but the Wexler name and connections got him where he is. Maybe that's why he keeps his distance from you, Nia suggested, unable to hold back. Because you never let him forget what you think he owes you. Richard's face flushed with anger. You're overstepping, Ms. Harper, and you're trying to intimidate me, Nia replied, finally letting her own anger show. It won't work. Richard studied her for a long moment. Then his expression shifted to something more calculating. How much? Nia blinked in confusion. Excuse me? How much will it take for you to leave Seacliff? Richard asked, reaching into his jacket pocket and pulling out a checkbook. Name your price. Nia stared at him in disbelief. You want to pay me to quit? I want to pay you to disappear, Richard clarified. Back to Brooklyn, or anywhere else far from my son. $50,000 should be more than generous for someone in your position. The insult stung, but more than that, Nia felt a deep sadness for Julian, having grown up with this man as his only parent after his mother left. Keep your money, Mr. Wexler, she said, standing up. I'm not for sale. Richard's expression darkened. Everyone has a price, Ms. Harper. It's just a matter of finding it. Not everyone is like you, Nia replied, turning to leave. This isn't over, Richard called after her. One way or another, you'll be gone before I leave Seacliff. Nia hurried from the room, her hands shaking with anger and hurt. She nearly collided with Julian in the hallway. Nia, he asked, concern etching his features as he took in her upset expression. What happened? Before she could answer, Richard emerged from the dining room. Ah, Julian. Perfect timing. I was just having an enlightening conversation with your housekeeper. The way he said housekeeper made it sound like something dirty. Julian's eyes moved from his father to Nia, understanding dawning. Whatever he said to you, Julian began. It's fine, Nia cut him off. I have work to do if you'll excuse me. She hurried away, needing space to collect herself. The encounter with Richard had shaken her more than she wanted to admit, not because of his threats, but because of the glimpse it provided into Julian's childhood. No wonder he had such deep wounds. Julian found her an hour later in the laundry room, aggressively folding sheets. I apologize for my father, he said, standing in the doorway. Nia continued folding. You don't need to apologize for him. I do, when he's in my house, upsetting someone Julian paused, then continued. Someone I care about. Nia's hands stilled on the sheet. She looked up to find Julian watching her intensely. He offered me money to leave Seacliff, she said bluntly. Julian's face drained of color. He what? $50,000 to disappear from your life, Nia clarified, a bitter smile touching her lips. Apparently I'm a distraction from your legacy obligations. Julian's hands clenched into fists at his sides. I'll speak to him. This is unacceptable. No, Nia said quickly. That's what he wants, to create conflict between us. There's already conflict, Nia, Julian said, frustration evident in his voice. There has been since the day he arrived. Nia set down the folded sheet and crossed to Julian, stopping just short of touching him. Your father sees me as a threat because I see you, the real you, not the Wexler heir or the tech genius, but Julian, the man who plays Chopin when he's sad and who hasn't cried since he was 8 years old. Julian's expression softened, vulnerability replacing anger. And what do you see when you look at me, Nia? I see someone worth knowing, she said simply. Someone worth caring about, despite the walls he's built. Julian swallowed hard, emotion making his voice rough when he spoke. My father believes those walls are necessary. What do you believe? Nia asked, echoing their conversation from the night before. Julian studied her face as if memorizing every detail. Then slowly, he reached out and took her hand in his. The touch was gentle, hesitant, but deliberate. I believe I'm tired of being alone, he whispered. Nia's heart pounded in her chest as Julian's thumb traced small circles on the back of her hand. Such a simple touch, but for Julian, she knew it represented so much more. Julian, she began, but was interrupted by the sound of a throat clearing. They turned to see Mrs. Finch standing in the doorway, her eyes wide with surprise. Mrs. Finch, Julian said, dropping Nia's hand and stepping back. You're back early. The older woman looked between them, a knowing expression crossing her face. My sister is feeling better, so I thought I'd return. I didn't mean to interrupt anything. You didn't, Julian said quickly, his mask slipping back into place. I was just checking on the laundry situation. Mrs. Finch raised an eyebrow but nodded. I see. Well, I should unpack. After she left, an awkward silence fell between Julian and Naya. I should get back to work, Naya said finally. Julian nodded, his expression unreadable once more. Of course. As he turned to leave, Naya called after him. Julian. He paused, looking back at her. For what it's worth, she said softly, I'm not going anywhere, no matter what your father offers. Something flickered in Julian's eyes, relief perhaps, or gratitude. He nodded once and then was gone, leaving Nia alone with the clean sheets and the lingering warmth of his touch on her hand. That evening, the atmosphere at dinner was even more tense than the night before. Richard dominated the conversation, discussing business and social connections, while Julian responded with minimal engagement. Nia and Mrs. Finch served the meal in silence, though Nia could feel Richard watching her whenever she entered the room. After dessert, Richard suggested brandy in the study. As Julian followed his father reluctantly, he caught Nia's eye, his expression apologetic. Hours later, as Nia prepared for bed, she heard raised voices coming from Julian's study. Unable to help herself, she crept down the hallway following the sound. Completely inappropriate, Julian was saying, his voice angrier than Nia had ever heard it. Don't be naive, Richard shot back. She wants something from you. They all do. Money, status, security. Why else would a young woman like that isolate herself in this mausoleum with you? You don't know her, Julian replied, his tone icy. And you certainly don't know me if you think I'd believe your cynical worldview. I know people, Julian, Richard insisted. I've seen 100 women like her looking for a meal ticket. The fact that you can't see it only proves how sheltered you've been. Sheltered? Julian laughed, the sound harsh and bitter. Is that what you call it? I was 8 when Mother left. You shipped me off to boarding school a week later and visited twice a year. The only things you ever taught me were that love is weakness and trust is for fools. There was a pause, and when Richard spoke again, his voice was quieter but no less cutting. And has your life not been better for those lessons? Look at what you've built, what you've achieved. Would any of that have been possible if you'd been wallowing in emotional entanglements? I built my company despite your lessons. Not because of them, Julian replied. And what's it all worth if I have no one to share it with? So that's what this is about? Richard scoffed. You're lonely? So you've fixated on the first pretty face that showed you kindness? Pathetic, Julian. I thought I raised you to be stronger than that. You didn't raise me at all, Julian said, his voice suddenly calm and cold. You funded my education and expected returns on your investment. That's not parenting, it's business. Don't be dramatic, Richard dismissed. Everything I've done has been for your benefit. No, Julian countered. Everything you've done has been for the Wexler name, the Wexler legacy. Not once have you asked what I want, what would make me happy. Happiness is a luxury, Julian, Richard said, sounding weary. Security, respect, power, these are what matter in the long run. I'm not you, Father, Julian said quietly, and I don't want to become you. Alone, bitter, manipulating others because you can't bear to see them find what you never had. There was a long silence, then the sound of a glass being set down hard. You're making a mistake, Richard said, his voice tight with anger. That girl will hurt you, mark my words, and when she does, don't come crying to me. I wouldn't dream of it, Julian replied. Now, if you'll excuse me, I think we've said all there is to say. Nia quickly retreated as she heard footsteps approaching the study door. She barely made it around the corner before Julian emerged, his face flushed with anger, but his eyes filled with something that looked like resolve. The next morning, Richard announced he would be leaving a day early. Pressing business in London, he told Julian over breakfast, not bothering to look up from his newspaper. The car will be here at noon. Julian merely nodded, relief evident in the set of his shoulders. As Mrs. Finch and Nia prepared Richard's room for his departure, the older woman glanced at Nia with concern. Be careful, dear, she said quietly. Mr. Wexler isn't like other employers. Nia paused in her work. What do you mean? Mrs. Finch sighed, smoothing the bedspread with gnarled hands. I've worked here since he bought this place 5 years ago. In all that time, you're the first person he's truly let in. That makes you special, but it also makes you vulnerable. Mrs. Finch, Nia began, but the older woman shook her head. I'm not blind, child. I see how you look at each other. Just be gentle with him. He's stronger than he knows, but more fragile than he appears. Before Nia could respond, they heard Richard's voice in the hallway. Miss Harper, a word please. Mrs. Finch gave Nia a warning look as she slipped out of the room, passing Richard in the doorway. Richard closed the door behind him, leaving them alone. Nia straightened her spine, determined not to show fear. "You wanted to speak with me, sir?" she asked coolly. Richard studied her for a moment, then reached into his jacket pocket. "I believe in giving second chances, Ms. Harper." He extended an envelope toward her. $100,000, enough to start that bookstore cafe my son tells me you dream about. Nia stared at the envelope but didn't take it. "I already told you I'm not for sale." "Everyone has their price," Richard insisted, "and everyone has their secrets." A chill ran down Nia's spine at his tone. "What does that mean?" Richard smiled, the expression not reaching his eyes. "It means I had my people look into your background more thoroughly. The broken engagement, the miscarriage, such tragedy for one so young." Nia felt the blood drain from her face. "How did you—" "I make it my business to know things, Ms. Harper," Richard cut her off. "Things like hospital records, therapy sessions. Did you know medical privacy has so many loopholes if one knows where to look?" "That's illegal," Nia whispered, her hands trembling. "Perhaps," Richard conceded with a shrug, "but effective. Now, I wonder how my son would feel knowing you've kept such significant secrets from him, especially given his issues with trust." Nia felt sick. "Are you blackmailing me?" "I prefer to think of it as incentivizing honesty," Richard replied smoothly. "Either take the money and leave quietly, or I'll ensure Julian knows exactly what you've been hiding from him." "I haven't been hiding anything," Nia protested. "Those things are personal, painful. I've shared them with Julian in my own time, in my own way." Richard's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Have you now? How interesting. Then I suppose he already knows about the lawsuit." Nia froze. "What lawsuit?" "The one you filed against Brooklyn Memorial Hospital, claiming their negligence contributed to your miscarriage," Richard said, watching her reaction closely. "The one you settled quietly 2 months ago, just before coming here." Nia felt her knees weaken. She hadn't told Julian about that, hadn't told anyone except her lawyer. The settlement had given her the money to start over, to escape the painful memories of Brooklyn. "How would Julian feel," Richard continued, "knowing you came here not just for a fresh start, but with enough money that you certainly don't need this job? That perhaps you had other motivations for seeking employment in an isolated mansion with a wealthy, vulnerable man?" "It wasn't like that," Nia insisted, her voice shaking. "I needed more than just money to start over. I needed distance, peace." "A convenient story," Richard said dismissively. "But I doubt Julian would see it that way, given his history with deception." Nia felt trapped, cornered by this ruthless man who would use her pain as a weapon. "What do you want from me?" Richard placed the envelope on the dresser. "Take the money. Leave today while I'm still here to help Julian process your betrayal, or stay, and I'll make sure he knows everything, framed in the most unflattering light possible." "You would hurt your own son just to control him?" Nia asked, disgust evident in her voice. "I would protect my son from making the biggest mistake of his life," Richard corrected. "Sometimes pain now prevents greater pain later." He moved to the door, pausing with his hand on the knob. "You have until my car arrives at noon. Choose wisely, Ms. Harper." After he left, Nia sank onto the bed, her mind racing. She had done nothing wrong. The settlement money was rightfully hers after the hospital's negligence, but she knew how it would sound if Richard twisted the facts. Julian's traumatic experience with betrayal at boarding school had left deep scars. Would he believe she had been using him somehow? The thought of hurting Julian made her physically ill, but the thought of leaving him to face his father alone was equally painful. Nia looked at the envelope on the dresser. $100,000. Enough to start her bookstore cafe anywhere she wanted. A dream within reach. But in the month she'd been at Seacliff, a new dream had begun to take shape. One that involved Julian's rare smile, his gentle touch, the walls slowly coming down between them. She needed to think, to clear her head. Grabbing her jacket, Nia slipped out the service entrance and headed for the cliffside path where she sometimes walked on her days off. The ocean breeze whipped her hair as she followed the path, her mind churning with impossible choices. The waves crashed against the rocks below, wild and relentless, like Richard Wexler's determination to separate her from Julian. Julian found the envelope in Nia's empty room an hour later. Mrs. Finch had mentioned seeing Nia leave the house upset, and Julian had immediately gone looking for her. The envelope lay on her neatly made bed, unsealed. Inside was a cashier's check for $100,000 and a brief note in his father's handwriting, "For your fresh start, anywhere but here." Cold fury washed over Julian. His father had gone too far this time. He found Richard in the foyer, checking his watch as the car pulled up outside. What did you do? Julian demanded, holding up the envelope. Where is she? Richard glanced at the envelope, his expression unreadable. Ah, I see she left it behind. Interesting choice. Answer me, Julian growled, advancing on his father. What did you say to her? I merely offered her an opportunity, Richard replied calmly, and shared some concerns about her background. Julian's stomach dropped. What are you talking about? Richard sighed, checking his watch again. Julian, did you know your Miss Harper received a substantial settlement from a hospital just before coming here? That she has no financial need to work as a housekeeper? Confusion clouded Julian's anger. What settlement? She sued Brooklyn Memorial after losing a baby, Richard said, watching Julian's reaction carefully. Claimed their negligence caused her miscarriage. Settled for a tidy sum 2 months ago. Julian felt like he'd been punched. Nia had told him about the miscarriage, but not about any lawsuit or settlement. How do you know this? He asked, his voice hollow. I protect what's mine, Richard said simply. Including you, whether you appreciate it or not. Julian's mind raced. So you what, threatened to tell me if she didn't leave? I gave her a choice, Richard corrected. Take the money and go, or stay and face the consequences of her deception. There was no deception, Julian snapped. She told me about the miscarriage. Now it was Richard's turn to look surprised. Did she? Interesting. But did she tell you she came here with enough money to buy her own business? That she has no need for the salary you pay her? Julian hesitated, doubt creeping in despite himself. Why would Nia take a job as a housekeeper if she had settlement money? Richard saw the uncertainty in Julian's eyes and pressed his advantage. Think, Julian, a young, attractive woman suddenly appearing in your isolated home, working for minimal wages when she doesn't need the money. What does that suggest to you? That she needed more than money, Julian replied, but his voice lacked conviction. That she needed a fresh start, just like she said. Or that she saw an opportunity, Richard suggested. A wealthy, reclusive man, known for his social awkwardness. An easy target, perhaps. Julian shook his head, trying to clear the doubts his father was planting. You don't know her. Neither do you, son, Richard said, his voice softening in a rare display of what almost seemed like genuine concern. Not really. How could you, after only a month? The chauffeur appeared at the door. Sir, we need to leave now to make your flight. Richard nodded, then turned back to Julian. I've said my piece. What you do with this information is up to you. He picked up his briefcase. But remember what happened the last time you trusted someone who showed unexpected interest in you. The reference to the boarding school incident hit Julian like a physical blow. As Richard walked out to the waiting car, Julian stood frozen in the foyer, the envelope still clutched in his hand, doubt and fear battling with the feelings he'd begun to develop for Nia. Where was she? And more importantly, had anything between them been real? Nia sat on a rocky outcropping, watching the waves crash below. The wind had picked up, matching the turmoil in her heart. She had made her decision. No amount of money was worth walking away from what was growing between her and Julian. She would tell him everything, about the miscarriage, the lawsuit, the settlement. If he couldn't accept it, at least she would have been honest. The sound of footsteps on the path made her turn. Julian was walking toward her, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. In his hand was the envelope his father had left in her room. Her heart sank. Richard had gotten to him already. Julian, she began, standing to face him. I can explain. Julian stopped a few feet away, his eyes searching hers. Why didn't you tell me about the settlement? About having money of your own? The hurt in his voice cut deep. I was going to, Nia said. It's tied to the most painful experience of my life. I don't talk about it easily. But you told me about the miscarriage, Julian pointed out. Why not the rest? Nia took a deep breath. Because the lawsuit made it all so public, clinical. In court, my baby became a legal term, fetal demise due to negligence. I had to listen to lawyers debate what my child's life was worth in dollars. Her voice broke. I couldn't bear to relive that part, not until I knew you better. Julian's expression softened slightly. So there was a settlement? Nia nodded. Yes, 2 months ago. Enough to start over somewhere new, but not enough to erase the memories. Then why take a job as a housekeeper? Julian asked, the question that was clearly troubling him most. Why work for me when you didn't need to? Because money doesn't heal grief, Julian, Nia said quietly. I needed purpose, structure. I needed to be useful to someone while I figured out how to be myself again. Julian took a step closer, hope and doubt battling in his eyes. So it wasn't, you weren't trying to take advantage of you? Nia finished for him, hurt flashing across her face. Is that what your father told you? That I targeted you somehow? Julian looked away, his silence confirming her suspicions. Julian, look at me, Nia said, moving closer until they were just inches apart. I came to Seacliff because I needed peace. I stayed because of you, because somehow, in this giant house with all its emptiness, I found someone who understands what it means to be broken. Julian's eyes met hers, vulnerable and searching. My father says I'm an easy target, that my inexperience that makes me vulnerable to manipulation. Nia felt tears well in her eyes. Your father sees relationships as transactions. I don't. What's growing between us, Julian? It's not about money or advantage. It's about two people who've been hurt finding something unexpected in each other. Julian reached out hesitantly, brushing a tear from her cheek with his thumb. The simple touch sent warmth through her despite the cold wind. I want to believe you, he whispered. But I've been wrong before. Disastrously wrong. I know, Nia said, covering his hand with hers, holding it against her cheek. And I can't promise I'll never hurt you. No one can promise that, but I can promise I'll never intentionally deceive you. Julian's gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes. For a moment, Nia thought he might kiss her. Instead, he stepped back, removing his hand from her cheek. I need time, he said, his voice rough with emotion. To think, to sort through all this. The distance between them felt like miles, though they stood just feet apart. Nia nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. I understand. Julian turned to go, then paused. Will you be here when I get back? Or will you take his money and leave? The question hung between them, loaded with meaning. That depends, Nia replied honestly. On whether you want me to stay. Julian looked at her, vulnerability raw on his face. I don't know what I want anymore, except, he hesitated, then finished quietly, except not to be alone. As he walked back toward the house, Nia remained on the cliff, watching the man who had come to mean so much to her disappear around the bend. Richard Wexler was leaving today, but his poisonous words remained, casting doubt on the fragile trust Julian had begun to build. Nia looked down at the churning sea below, then back towards Seacliff Manor. Stay or go? Her heart knew the answer, but would Julian's doubts allow him to see it? The wind whipped around her as clouds gathered on the horizon, promising another storm, like the one brewing in her heart. The day after Richard Wexler's departure, Seacliff Manor felt different. The oppressive tension had lifted, but in its place was an uncomfortable silence. Julian had retreated to his study, emerging only for meals which he took alone. Nia continued her duties, the envelope with Richard's check burning a hole in her dresser drawer where she'd placed it. Mrs. Finch watched the situation with worried eyes. He's hurting, she told Nia as they prepared lunch. I've seen him like this before after difficult visits from his father. I don't know what to do, Nia admitted, chopping vegetables with more force than necessary. I've told him the truth, but Richard planted seeds of doubt. Julian's had trust broken before. Mrs. Finch patted Nia's hand. Give him time, dear. Mr. Wexler processes things slowly, especially emotions. But as days passed with Julian maintaining his distance, Nia began to wonder if time would be enough. Each night she sat in her room staring at Richard's check, wondering if leaving might be kinder to them both. If Julian couldn't trust her, what future could they have? On the fourth night after Richard's departure, Nia couldn't sleep. She made her way to the kitchen for tea, their midnight ritual that now felt like a distant memory. To her surprise, light spilled from beneath the kitchen door. Julian sat at the island, a cup of cooling tea before him, staring out at the moonlit ocean. He looked exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes and his usually neat hair mussed, as if he'd been running his hands through it. Couldn't sleep? Nia asked softly from the doorway. Julian turned, startled by her voice. For a moment, something like relief crossed his features before his expression became guarded again. No, he said simply. Nia hesitated, then moved to the kettle. Mind if I join you? Julian gestured to the seat across from him, an echo of their previous late-night conversations. As Nia prepared her tea, the silence between them felt heavier than ever. When she finally sat across from him, Julian spoke. I went to the cliff path today, he said, his voice low, where we talked after my father left. Nia nodded, waiting for him to continue. I kept thinking about what you said, about being broken. Julian's eyes met hers, and about finding something unexpected here. I meant it, Nia said quietly. Julian nodded slowly. I know. That's what scares me. The admission hung between them. Nia wrapped her hands around her mug, drawing warmth from it. Why does that scare you? Julian was quiet for so long that Nia thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice was barely above a whisper. Because the walls I've built kept me safe, lonely, but safe. He looked at her, vulnerability raw in his eyes. So you make me want to tear them down, and I'm not sure what's left of me underneath. Nia's heart ached at his words. Julian, those walls didn't keep you safe. They kept you isolated. There's a difference. Is there? He asked. My father would say isolation is the only true safety. Your father is a bitter, controlling man who uses fear to keep you under his influence, Nia said, unable to hold back. He doesn't want you to connect with anyone because then you might break free of him completely. Julian's eyes widened slightly at her bluntness, but he didn't disagree. The check is still in my drawer, Nia continued. I haven't cashed it. I won't cash it. Why not? Julian asked. It's a lot of money. Because I don't want to start over somewhere else, Nia said simply. Not anymore. Julian studied her face. Because of me? Partly, Nia admitted. But also because running away doesn't solve anything. I tried that when I left Brooklyn. Julian nodded slowly. I've been running too, in my own way. Since boarding school. Since my mother left. They sat in silence for a moment, the admission hanging between them. I looked into the lawsuit, Julian finally said. Against Brooklyn Memorial. Nia tensed. You did? I wanted to understand, Julian explained. Why you didn't tell me about it. And do you understand? Nia asked. Julian nodded. The transcripts, they were brutal, clinical, like you said. I can see why you wouldn't want to relive that. Relief washed over Nia. So you believe me? I want to, Julian said, his voice rough with emotion. More than anything, I want to trust what's happening between us. But, Nia prompted, hearing the unspoken word. But I've been wrong before, Julian admitted. Catastrophically wrong. Nia reached across the table, her hand palm up in invitation. The girl at boarding school, she pretended to care to win a bet. I'm not pretending, Julian. I'm here because being with you makes me feel whole again. Julian stared at her outstretched hand, conflict clear in his eyes. Slowly, hesitantly, he placed his hand in hers. The touch sent warmth spreading through Nia's chest. I don't know how to do this, Julian confessed. I don't know how to let someone in without fear. Neither do I, Nia admitted. After Marcus and the baby, I was scared to feel anything again. Julian's thumb traced small circles on her palm, the simple touch making her heart race. So where does that leave us? Two broken people afraid to trust? Nia smiled softly. Maybe two broken people helping each other heal. Something shifted in Julian's eyes, hope replacing doubt. He squeezed her hand gently. I'd like that. The moment stretched between them, fragile and precious. Then Julian stood, still holding her hand. It's late. We should try to sleep. Nia nodded, rising as well. They walked through the darkened house, their joined hands a tether neither wanted to break. At the base of the stairs where they would part ways, Julian paused. Nia, he said softly, I'm glad you stayed. The simple words meant everything. Me too, she replied. Julian hesitated, then leaned down and brushed his lips against her cheek, so gentle it was barely a touch at all. Before Nia could react, he was gone, taking the stairs two at a time toward his room. Nia stood frozen, her cheek tingling from the brief contact. It wasn't a kiss, not really, but for Julian, a man who avoided physical contact, it was monumental. As she made her way to her own room, Nia felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. The next morning, Julian joined Nia and Mrs. Finch for breakfast in the kitchen, something he had never done before. Mrs. Finch nearly dropped the coffee pot in surprise when he walked in, dressed more casually than usual in jeans and a simple button-down shirt. Good morning, he said, looking directly at Nia with a small smile. Good morning, Nia replied, unable to keep the answering smile from her face. Mrs. Finch looked between them, a knowing expression crossing her features. Well, she said briskly, shall I set another place at the table? Please, Julian said, taking the seat beside Nia rather than across from her. If that's all right. Of course, Mrs. Finch replied, hiding a smile as she bustled about, setting an extra plate. Throughout breakfast, Julian seemed different, more relaxed, less formal. He asked about their plans for the day and actually listened to the answers. When his hand accidentally brushed Nia's while reaching for the salt, he didn't flinch away. After breakfast, as Mrs. Finch cleared the dishes, Julian turned to Nia. I was wondering if you might join me for a walk later, along the cliff path. The weather's supposed to be clear today. I'd like that, Nia said, surprised but pleased by the invitation. Julian nodded, a hint of nervousness in his expression. 1 o'clock? I have some work to finish this morning. 1 o'clock, Nia confirmed. As Julian left for his study, Mrs. Finch raised an eyebrow at Nia. Well, well, she said. Something's changed. Nia felt her cheeks warm. We talked last night. Just talked? Mrs. Finch asked, her tone skeptical. Yes, Nia insisted, then added more softly, He kissed my cheek. Mrs. Finch's expression softened. Oh, my dear, for Mr. Wexler, that's practically a declaration. Nia knew she was right. That small gesture had meant more coming from Julian than grand romantic gestures would from other men. The morning dragged as Nia went about her duties, checking the clock every few minutes. By 12:30, she had changed clothes 3 times, finally settling on a simple sundress and light cardigan. She pulled her hair back in a loose bun, a few curls framing her face. At precisely 1 o'clock, Julian met her at the back door that led to the cliff path. He too had changed, wearing a lightweight sweater that made his dark skin glow in the afternoon sunlight. You look nice, he said, the compliment clearly unfamiliar on his tongue. Thank you, Nia replied. So do you. They set off along the path in comfortable silence, the ocean sparkling below them. Gulls called overhead and the salt-laden breeze tousled Nia's carefully arranged hair. I spoke to my lawyer this morning, Julian said after they'd walked for a while. Nia glanced at him, surprised. Oh? Julian nodded. About my father's involvement in my company. It seems he's been exaggerating his influence. What do you mean? Nia asked. Julian's expression was thoughtful. He likes to claim he was instrumental in my success, that his connections and initial investment made everything possible. And that's not true? Nia prompted. Not entirely, Julian admitted. He did invest in my first startup, but it was a modest amount. Most of the capital came from other investors who believed in the technology. A small, satisfied smile touched his lips. And as of this morning, I've bought out his shares completely. He no longer has any financial stake in my company. Nia's eyes widened. Julian, that's huge. He won't be happy. No, Julian agreed. He won't. But it was necessary. He looked at her, his expression serious. My father used his position as a shareholder to manipulate me, to threaten things that matter to me. The way he looked at her made it clear what or who he meant. I'm sorry he put you in that position, Nia said softly. Julian shook his head. Don't be. It forced me to take a step I should have taken years ago. He paused, then added, it also made me realize something important. What's that? Nia asked. Julian stopped walking, turning to face her. The ocean breeze ruffled his short hair as he looked at her intently. That some things are worth fighting for, worth risking everything for. Nia's heart pounded in her chest. Julian, I've spent my life avoiding connections, Julian continued, his voice rough with emotion. Avoiding anything that made me vulnerable. But these past weeks with you, he shook his head as if amazed by his own feelings. You've made me question everything I thought I knew about myself. Nia reached for his hand, entwining their fingers. That goes both ways. After losing the baby, I thought I'd never feel whole again, never trust anyone again. Julian's thumb traced circles on her hand, the gesture becoming familiar between them. We're quite a pair, aren't we? Both running from pain, both afraid to trust. Maybe that's why we understand each other, Nia suggested. Julian nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. Maybe it is. They continued their walk, hands still joined, talking more openly than ever before. Julian told her about the loneliness of boarding school, about building his company as a shield against a world that had hurt him. Nia shared stories of her grandmother who raised her, of her dreams for the future, of the pain of her betrayal and loss. When they reached a small cove, sheltered from the wind, Julian suggested they sit. A large, flat rock provided a natural bench overlooking the water. I've never brought anyone here before, Julian admitted as they sat side by side. Here's always been my private thinking spot. It's beautiful, Nia said, taking in the secluded inlet with its clear turquoise water. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the waves lap against the shore. Then Julian spoke, his voice quiet but firm. I want you to use the settlement money for your bookstore cafe, he said. Not my father's money, that should be burned or donated, but your settlement. It was meant to help you start over. Nia looked at him in surprise. You've been thinking about my bookstore? Julian nodded. There's a vacant storefront in town, the old Bayside Books that closed last year. It has a small cafe space already built in. You've looked into this? Nia asked, touched by his thoughtfulness. I made some inquiries, Julian admitted. It's a good location, reasonable rent. Nia felt tears prick her eyes. No one had ever supported her dreams this way. Thank you. But if I open a bookstore, what about your job at Seacliff? Julian finished for her. He looked out at the ocean, his expression unreadable. That's something we need to discuss. Nia's heart sank. Was he suggesting she should leave after all? Julian must have sensed her distress because he quickly turned back to her, taking both her hands in his. Not because I want you to go, he clarified, but because our relationship has changed, is changing. Relief washed over Nia. Yes, it is. Julian looked down at their joined hands, seemingly gathering courage. I've never done this before, he said softly. I've never felt this way about anyone. Neither have I, Nia admitted. Not like this. Julian's eyes met hers, vulnerability and determination mingling in his gaze. I want to try, Nia. I want to see where this leads, but I'm going to make mistakes. I don't know how to be close to someone. We'll figure it out together, Nia promised. One day at a time. Something shifted in Julian's expression, a decision made. Slowly, telegraphing his movements to give her time to pull away, he leaned forward. Nia's breath caught as his lips brushed against hers, so gentle it was barely a touch. Julian pulled back slightly, his eyes searching hers for permission. In answer, Nia reached up to cup his cheek, guiding him back to her. This time the kiss deepened, still tender but more certain. Julian's hand came up to rest lightly on her waist, as if afraid she might break under his touch. When they finally parted, Julian rested his forehead against hers, his breathing uneven. That was worth waiting for, Nia finished for him, smiling softly. Julian returned her smile, relief and wonder in his eyes. Definitely worth waiting for. They stayed in the cove for hours, talking, sharing occasional gentle kisses, planning. By the time they headed back to Seacliff, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. As they approached the house, Julian stopped, turning to Nia with sudden seriousness. I want you to know something, he said. Whatever happens with us, the bookstore is yours. No strings, no conditions. Your dream matters to me because you matter to me. Nia felt tears well in her eyes at his words. Thank you, she whispered. Julian reached up to brush away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. No more tears, he said softly. We've both had enough sadness. As they entered the house, Mrs. Finch took one look at their clasped hands and Julian's relaxed expression and broke into a wide smile. Well, it's about time, she declared, making them both laugh. That night, Nia lay in bed, replaying the day in her mind. The feel of Julian's lips on hers, his hand in hers, the way he looked at her as if she were something precious. For the first time since losing her baby, she felt truly hopeful about the future. The following weeks brought changes to Seacliff Manor. Julian emerged from his self-imposed isolation, working regular hours and joining Nia and Mrs. Finch for meals. He and Nia spent evenings in the library, reading together or talking about their days. Sometimes Julian played the piano while Nia listened, his music becoming less melancholy, more hopeful. On weekends, they explored the coastal town nearby, Julian wearing a cap and sunglasses to avoid recognition. They visited the vacant bookstore space, and Nia fell in love with its bay windows and cozy atmosphere. Julian helped her draft a business plan, his tech expertise complementing her creative vision. Physical intimacy came slowly, respectfully. Julian was hesitant, sometimes pulling back when emotions ran high, still battling his deeply ingrained fears. But each day brought new progress, a lingering touch, a deeper kiss, the gradual dismantling of walls built over decades. One evening, as they sat in the music room after dinner, Julian at the piano, Nia beside him on the bench, he suddenly stopped playing. "Move in with me," he said abruptly. Nia blinked in surprise. "What?" Julian turned to face her, determination in his eyes. "Not as my housekeeper, as my partner. Move into the main part of the house with me." "Julian," Nia began, her heart racing. "Are you sure? That's a big step." "I've never been more sure of anything," Julian replied. "I love you, Nia. I should have said it before, but I needed to be certain I understood what that meant." Tears filled Nia's eyes at his words, the first time he'd spoken of love. "I love you too," she whispered. Julian took her hands in his. "Then say yes. Stay with me, not as an employee, but as the woman I love." "Yes," Nia said, a smile breaking through her tears. "Of course, yes." Julian's answering smile was radiant. He pulled her close, kissing her with more passion than ever before, his usual restraint giving way to the depth of his feelings. Later that week, Nia moved her things from the east wing into the master suite. Mrs. Finch helped, humming happily as she arranged Nia's clothes beside Julian's in the massive closet. "Never thought I'd see the day," the older woman confessed. "When he hired me 5 years ago, he was so closed off I wondered if he even had a heart." "You've worked miracles, my dear." "Not miracles," Nia corrected gently, "just patience and understanding." That night, as Nia lay beside Julian in their bed, she marveled at how much had changed in just 2 months. From strangers to lovers, from emptiness to hope. "What are you thinking?" Julian asked, his voice soft in the darkness. "How lucky I am," Nia replied, nestling closer to him, "that my fresh start brought me here to you." Julian's arm tightened around her. "I'm the lucky one," he murmured against her hair. "You saved me from a half-life, Nia. I didn't even realize how empty I was until you filled the spaces." They drifted to sleep in each other's arms, the sound of the ocean a gentle lullaby outside their window. 2 weeks later, as autumn painted the Maine coastline in vibrant colors, Nia was in town finalizing the lease for her bookstore cafe. The grand opening was scheduled for spring, giving her time to renovate and order inventory. Julian had insisted on being a silent partner, providing additional capital while leaving the business decisions entirely to her. As she left the real estate office, signed lease in hand, Nia's phone rang. The screen showed Julian's name, making her smile. "I just signed the lease," she said by way of greeting. "It's official." "That's wonderful," Julian replied, but something in his voice made Nia pause. "What's wrong?" she asked, instantly alert. There was a moment of silence before Julian answered. "My father called. He's coming back." Nia's stomach dropped. "When?" "Tomorrow," Julian said. "He's not happy about me buying out his shares, or about us." "How does he know about us?" Nia asked, though she wasn't really surprised. "Richard Wexler seemed to make it his business to know everything about his son's life. He has his ways," Julian said grimly. "But this time is different, Nia. I'm not the same man he bullied before. I won't let him come between us." The determination in Julian's voice reassured her. "We'll face him together," she promised. "Actually," Julian said, his tone changing slightly, "I had an idea about that." "How quickly can you get back to Seacliff?" 20 minutes, Nia replied, already heading for her car. "Why? What are you planning?" "Something I should have done a long time ago," Julian said cryptically. "I'll explain when you get here." The drive back to Seacliff seemed to take forever, Nia's mind racing with possibilities. What was Julian planning? And how would Richard Wexler react when he discovered just how much had changed since his last visit? When Nia arrived, she found Julian in his study, on the phone with someone. He waved her in, his expression more animated than she'd ever seen it. "Yes, tomorrow afternoon would be perfect," he was saying. 3 o'clock, thank you." He hung up and crossed the room to Nia, taking her hands in his. "How do you feel about making a statement?" he asked, his eyes bright with determination. "What kind of statement?" Nia asked, confused. Julian's smile was both nervous and excited. "The kind that shows my father once and for all that I'm living my life on my terms now. With you." "Julian," Nia said slowly, "what exactly are you planning?" Instead of answering directly, Julian led her to the sofa and sat beside her, still holding her hands. "My father arrives tomorrow at noon," he began. "He expects to find me chastened, ready to apologize for buying out his shares, perhaps even having sent you away to appease him." Nia nodded, knowing Richard well enough now to understand his expectations. "But what if," Julian continued, his voice gaining confidence, "what if instead he finds us not only together but celebrating our engagement?" Nia's eyes widened. "Engagement." Julian's expression softened, and he slid from the sofa to one knee before her. "This isn't how I planned to do this," he admitted. "I wanted something romantic, perfect, but somehow this feels right." He took a deep breath. "Nia Harper, you've brought light and warmth back into my life. You've shown me that I'm capable of love, of trust, of connection. Will you marry me?" Tears filled Nia's eyes as joy surged through her. "Julian, are you sure? This isn't just about your father." Julian shook his head firmly. "My father's visit only accelerated my timeline. I've been carrying this around for a week, waiting for the perfect moment." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, opening it to reveal a stunning emerald-cut diamond set in platinum. "It's beautiful," Nia breathed. "Is that a yes?" Julian asked, a hint of his old uncertainty creeping into his voice. Nia cupped his face in her hands. "Yes," she whispered. 1,000 times yes. Relief and happiness transformed Julian's features. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms, kissing her deeply. When they finally parted, both breathless, Julian explained the rest of his plan. "I've arranged for Judge Michaels, an old friend from Oxford who lives in Portland now, to come tomorrow at 3. We can make it official right here with Mrs. Finch as witness." "Tomorrow?" Nia asked, surprised by the speed. "Are you sure that's not too rushed?" Julian's expression grew serious. "I know it seems fast. And if you want to wait, have a proper wedding later, we absolutely can, but I want my father to see that I'm serious about us, that this isn't something he can undermine or destroy." Nia understood his reasoning, but still hesitated. "Julian, I don't want our wedding to be about your father. It should be about us." Julian nodded, taking her concerns seriously. "You're right. Let me think about this differently." He stood and paced the room, then turned back to her with new resolve. "What if we have a private ceremony tomorrow? Just us and Mrs. Finch, no mention of it to my father. And then a proper celebration later with friends, when we're ready." "And when your father arrives?" Nia asked. "We simply tell him the truth, that we're engaged and planning our future together." Julian's expression hardened slightly. "He needs to understand that I'm not asking for his approval anymore." Nia considered the plan. It felt right, affirming their commitment to each other first, then dealing with Richard from a position of unity. "Okay," she agreed. "Let's do it." Julian's face lit up with joy. He pulled her to her feet and into his arms, holding her close as if he couldn't believe his good fortune. "I never thought I'd have this," he confessed against her hair. "Never thought I was capable of it." "You're capable of so much more than you know," Nia told him, leaning back to look into his eyes. "And I can't wait to discover it all with you." They spent the evening making plans, not just for the small ceremony the next day, but for their future together. Julian seemed transformed, the last of his hesitancy falling away as he embraced the path before them. Later, as they lay together in the darkness, Julian traced lazy patterns on Nia's bare shoulder. "Are you nervous about tomorrow?" he asked. "About my father?" Nia considered the question. "A little," she admitted. "Hi's a formidable man, but I'm not afraid of him anymore." Julian pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Neither am I," he said, wonder in his voice. "For the first time in my life, I'm not afraid of Richard Wexler." Nia snuggled closer, feeling the steady beat of Julian's heart against her cheek. That might be what scares him the most. As they drifted to sleep, the waves crashed against the cliffs below Seacliff Manor, constant and eternal, like the love that had grown between two broken souls who had found healing in each other's arms. The next morning dawned bright and clear, as if nature itself approved of their plans. Mrs. Finch was overjoyed when they told her about the ceremony, immediately setting about preparing a special meal and arranging flowers from the garden. By 11, everything was ready. The small parlor overlooking the ocean had been transformed with candles and flowers. Mrs. Finch had pressed Julian's best suit and helped Nia select a simple cream-colored dress from her closet. "It's not a traditional wedding gown," the older woman fretted. "It's perfect," Nia assured her. "This isn't about tradition. It's about Julian and me making a commitment to each other." At 11:30, as Nia was putting the finishing touches on her hair, Julian knocked on the bedroom door. "Can I come in?" he called. "I have something for you." Nia opened the door to find Julian holding a small jewelry box. "I thought you weren't supposed to see the bride before the wedding," she teased. Julian smiled, looking more relaxed and happy than she'd ever seen him. "I think we've established that we're not following all the traditions today." He opened the box to reveal a delicate diamond necklace. "It was my mother's," he explained. "One of the few things she left behind. I found it in the safe this morning and thought, maybe you'd want to wear it." Nia was touched by the gesture. "Are you sure? If it was your mother's—" "I'm sure," Julian said firmly. "She may have left, but this necklace should be worn by someone who stays, someone who loves without conditions." Tears pricked Nia's eyes as she turned, allowing Julian to fasten the necklace around her neck. His fingers lingered on her skin, sending shivers down her spine. "You look beautiful," he murmured, pressing a gentle kiss to the nape of her neck. "Save something for the ceremony," Nia teased, turning back to face him. Julian's expression grew serious. "I can't believe this is happening," he said softly. "That you're choosing me." "I chose you the moment I stayed," Nia replied, touching his cheek gently. "Today just makes it official." The sound of tires on gravel interrupted the moment. They both tensed, moving to the window to see a familiar black car pulling up the drive. "He's early," Julian said, his jaw tightening. Of course he is, Naya replied. He probably wants to catch us off guard. Julian took a deep breath, then reached for Naya's hand. Then let's greet him together. United, hand in hand, they descended the stairs, just as Mrs. Finch opened the front door to reveal Richard Wexler, impeccably dressed as always, his expression thunderous. Julian, he began without preamble, then stopped short when he saw Nia beside his son, their hands clasped firmly together. His eyes narrowed as they fell on the engagement ring sparkling on Nia's finger. Father, Julian said calmly, you're early. Richard's gaze moved between them, calculating as always. Apparently not early enough, he observed coldly. I see you've made some decisions in my absence. Yes, Julian agreed, his voice steady. I have. The two men stared at each other, the tension thick enough to cut. Nia squeezed Julian's hand supportively, feeling him draw strength from her presence. Perhaps we should continue this conversation inside, Julian suggested, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request. As Richard stepped past them into the foyer, his eyes fell on the parlor with its flowers and candles. His expression darkened further. What exactly is going on here? He demanded. Julian's grip on Nia's hand tightened. Nia and I are getting married today, he said simply. Judge Michaels will be here at 3. Richard's face flushed with anger. This is absurd, he spat. You barely know this woman. This is clearly a reaction to my legitimate business concerns. This has nothing to do with business, Julian interrupted, his voice firm but controlled. This is about my life, my future, with Nia. You're making a mistake, Richard insisted, his cold eyes fixing on Nia. She's using you, Julian, can't you see that? Julian stepped forward, placing himself slightly in front of Nia. The only mistake I've made is allowing you to control my life for so long. That ends today. Richard's expression hardened. If you go through with this farce, you're no longer my son. Julian didn't even flinch at the threat. I stopped being your son the day you taught me that emotions were weakness, the day you told me I deserved to be humiliated because I dared to care about someone. Richard looked taken aback by Julian's directness. For once, he seemed at a loss for words. You have a choice, Father, Julian continued, his voice softening slightly. You can accept my decision and be part of my life, or you can leave now and miss your only son's wedding. But either way, I'm marrying Nia today. The silence that followed was deafening. Nia held her breath, watching Richard's face for any sign of softening. For a moment, something like regret flashed in his eyes. Then his expression hardened once more. You'll regret this, he said coldly. Without another word, he turned and walked out the door, not even bothering to close it behind him. Julian stood motionless, watching through the open door as his father's car disappeared down the driveway. Nia moved to his side, slipping her arm around his waist. Are you okay? She asked softly. Julian was quiet for a long moment, then turned to look at her, a surprising peace in his eyes. Yes, he said, for the first time in my life, I think I really am. He closed the door firmly, symbolically shutting out the toxic influence that had shadowed his life for so long. Then he turned to Nia, taking both her hands in his. Now, he said, a genuine smile lighting his features, let's get married. As they moved toward the parlor where Mrs. Finch waited, tears of joy in her eyes, Nia felt a sense of rightness settle over her. They had both been broken, both been running from pain, but together they had found something neither thought possible again, wholeness. The judge wouldn't arrive for several hours yet, but as Julian pulled Nia into his arms, kissing her with all the love and promise of their future, she knew they had already begun their life together, a life built on understanding, trust, and the healing power of being truly seen and accepted. Outside, the waves continued their eternal dance with the shore, while inside Seacliff Manor, two souls who had known profound loneliness prepared to pledge themselves to ensuring neither would ever be alone again. At precisely 3 o'clock, Judge Michaels arrived at Seacliff Manor. He was a jovial man with silver hair and kind eyes, clearly delighted to be performing the ceremony for his old friend. Julian, my boy, he said, embracing Julian warmly. Oxford seems like a lifetime ago, doesn't it? And this must be the remarkable Nia I've heard so much about. Nia smiled, immediately liking the judge's friendly manner. It's a pleasure to meet you. The pleasure is mine, Judge Michaels replied, taking her hand between both of his. I've known Julian since he was a serious 18-year-old who rarely smiled. The man I see before me today is transformed. Julian's arm slipped around Nia's waist. I have Nia to thank for that. Mrs. Finch bustled in, wiping her hands on her apron. "Everything's ready in the parlor, Mr. Wexler, and I've prepared a small reception for after." "Thank you, Mrs. Finch," Julian said warmly. "We couldn't do this without you." The older woman blushed with pleasure. "Well, someone had to be family for you today." Her words hung in the air, a gentle acknowledgement of Richard's absence. But instead of sadness, Julian's expression showed only gratitude. "You've been more family to me than my father ever was," he told her sincerely. Tears welled in Mrs. Finch's eyes. Now," she said, fanning her face. "No crying before the ceremony. It's bad luck." They moved to the parlor, where sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating the simple but beautiful decorations. Candles flickered on every surface, and vases of white roses and blue hydrangeas from the garden brought color to the room. Judge Michaels took his position before the windows, the vast ocean forming a dramatic backdrop. Julian and Nia stood before him, holding hands, while Mrs. Finch watched from a few feet away, already dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. "We gather here today," Judge Michaels began, his deep voice filling the room, "to celebrate the union of two souls who have found in each other what many search a lifetime for: understanding, acceptance, and true love." Nia felt Julian's hand tighten around hers as the judge spoke. When she glanced up at him, she saw a sheen of tears in his eyes, though his smile was radiant. "Julian and Nia have chosen to write their own vows," Judge Michaels continued. "Julian, would you like to begin?" Julian turned to face Nia fully, taking both her hands in his. He took a deep breath, and when he spoke, his voice was steady and sure. "Nia, when you first came to Seacliff, I was a man who had forgotten how to feel. I had built walls so high and so thick that I thought nothing could breach them." He paused, his thumbs tracing circles on her hands. "But you didn't try to break those walls. Instead, you showed me that it was safe to lower them myself." Nia felt tears well in her eyes as Julian continued. "You saw me, not the reclusive millionaire, not the Wexler heir, but me, the broken, frightened man beneath the mask, and you didn't turn away." His voice roughened with emotion. "I promised to spend every day of our lives together, seeing you just as clearly. I promised to be your shelter in storms, your companion in joy, and your partner in all things. I promised to love you with everything I am and everything I will become because of your love." By the time he finished, tears were streaming down Nia's cheeks. She had to take a moment to compose herself before she could speak. "Julian," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "before I met you, I thought my heart was too damaged to ever love again. I came to Seacliff looking for escape, but what I found was a beginning." Julian's eyes never left hers as she continued. "You think I saved you, but the truth is we saved each other. You gave me purpose when I was lost, strength when I was weak, and hope when I had none." Nia squeezed his hands. "I promise to be patient with your fears and gentle with your heart. I promise to stand beside you in all battles, celebrate with you in all victories, and hold you close in all sorrows. I promise to love you without condition or reservation, today and all the days to come." Even Judge Michaels seemed moved, clearing his throat before continuing. "The rings, please." Julian reached into his pocket and produced two simple platinum bands. They had chosen them together the day before, making a quick trip to town while preparations continued at the house. As they exchanged rings, the simple bands gleaming in the afternoon light, Nia marveled at how far they had come. Just months ago, Julian had been afraid to shake her hand. Now he was pledging his life to her, his touch sure and steady as he slipped the ring onto her finger. "By the power vested in me," Judge Michaels declared, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." He smiled warmly at Julian. "You may kiss your bride." Julian cupped Nia's face in his hands with exquisite tenderness. "I love you," he whispered, for her ears alone. "I love you too," she replied, just before his lips met hers in a kiss that sealed their vows and promised a lifetime of tomorrows. Mrs. Finch's enthusiastic applause and Judge Michaels' hearty "Congratulations" broke the moment, bringing laughter and joy as Julian and Nia turned to face them as husband and wife. The small reception that followed was perfect in its simplicity. Mrs. Finch had outdone herself with a beautiful meal and a small but elegant wedding cake. They toasted with champagne, shared stories, and laughed together like the family they had become. As evening fell, Judge Michaels took his leave, embracing them both warmly. "I expect an invitation to your first anniversary," he told them, "and perhaps by then, there will be a little one to celebrate as well." Nia felt a momentary pang at his words, remembering the baby she had lost. Julian, sensitive to her feelings, squeezed her hand supportively. "One step at a time, Edward," he told his friend with a smile. "We have our whole lives ahead of us." After the judge left, Mrs. Finch insisted on cleaning up alone. "You two should have some time to yourselves," she said with a knowing smile. "I'll take care of everything here." As they walked upstairs to their room, now truly their room, Julian suddenly swept Nia into his arms, making her gasp in surprise. "Isn't this a bit traditional for you?" she teased as he carried her across the threshold. Julian's eyes twinkled with mischief and love. "I'm discovering that some traditions are worth keeping." He set her down gently inside the room, which had been transformed. Candles flickered everywhere, rose petals were scattered across the bed, and a bottle of champagne chilled in an ice bucket beside it. "Mrs. Finch," Julian explained with a smile. "She insisted on making things proper romantic for our wedding night." Nia laughed, touched by the older woman's thoughtfulness. "Remind me to give her a raise." "Already done," Julian said, pulling Nia into his arms. "And a very generous bonus. She's been more of a mother to me these past 5 years than anyone deserved." As Julian held her, Nia felt a sense of completeness she had never experienced before. The journey to this moment had been filled with pain for both of them, but somehow that made their happiness now all the sweeter. "Are you happy?" Julian asked softly, his breath warm against her hair. Nia leaned back to look up at him, at the face that had become so dear to her. "Completely," she whispered. "Are you?" Julian's smile was answer enough, but he spoke the words anyway. "More than I ever thought possible." As they sealed their vows in the most intimate way, the walls that had once separated them crumbled completely, leaving only love and trust in their place. The weeks following their impromptu wedding were filled with joy and adjustments, as Julian and Nia settled into married life. For Julian, who had lived alone for so long, sharing his space and his routine required some adaptation, but to his surprise, he found himself thriving with Nia's constant presence. "I thought I needed solitude," he confessed one morning as they had breakfast on the terrace overlooking the ocean. "But it turns out I was just waiting for the right person to share my life with." Nia reached across the table to take his hand. "Sometimes what we think we need and what we actually need are very different things." Julian nodded, thoughtful. "My father believed vulnerability was weakness, that needing someone else made you dependent, diminished." "And what do you believe now?" Nia asked. Julian's expression softened as he looked at her. "That there's strength in vulnerability, that opening yourself to love isn't weakness. It's the bravest thing a person can do." Their days fell into a comfortable rhythm. Julian continued running his company from his home office, but his work hours became more reasonable. He no longer used work as an escape from life, but as a part of a balanced existence that included Nia, leisure, and even socializing. Nia divided her time between making Seacliff truly their home and preparing for the bookstore's opening. Julian had insisted on hiring contractors to handle the renovations, allowing Nia to focus on ordering inventory, planning the cafe menu, and designing the space. "It's going to be beautiful," Julian said one evening as they reviewed the architect's drawings. "Just like you envisioned." "Our first Christmas will be in the new place," Nia said excitedly. "I want to have a big tree in the window and host a holiday reading for local children." Julian watched her animated face with love. "You're going to be wonderful at this. The whole town will fall in love with you and your bookstore." "Our bookstore," Nia corrected. "You may be a silent partner, but it wouldn't exist without you." Julian shook his head. "It would have existed eventually. I just helped speed things along." Their happiness was almost complete, but one shadow remained: Richard Wexler. Though Julian rarely mentioned his father, Nia occasionally caught him staring at the phone after checking the caller ID, or frowning over business news that mentioned Wexler Sr.'s activities in London. 6 weeks after their wedding, as they ate dinner in the kitchen, a casual habit they'd adopted, much to Mrs. Finch's initial dismay, Julian's phone rang. His face tightened as he checked the screen. "It's him," he said quietly. Nia reached across the table, touching his arm. "You don't have to answer." Julian hesitated, then shook his head. "No, I should." He took a deep breath and answered, "Hello, Father." Nia could only hear Julian's side of the conversation, but she could tell from his responses that Richard was not calling to reconcile. "I see," Julian said, his voice cooling. "No, that decision is final. I understand your position, but my answer remains the same." "Yes, we're very happy, thank you for asking," he added with a touch of sarcasm. When he hung up, Julian sat quietly for a moment, his expression troubled. "What did he want?" Nia asked gently. He's arranged another potential buyer for the company, Julian explained. An Asian tech conglomerate offering even more than 10 Corp. And you turned him down, Naya stated, not asking. Julian nodded. The company isn't for sale. Not to 10 Corp, not to anyone. It's not about the money. It's about the work, the vision. He sighed, rubbing his temples. He also made it clear that he still disapproves of our marriage. Did you expect anything else? Nia asked. No, Julian admitted. But part of me hoped. He trailed off, not needing to finish the thought. Despite everything, some small part of him still longed for his father's approval, or at least his acceptance. Nia moved around the table to wrap her arms around him from behind. I'm sorry, she whispered, resting her cheek against his. Julian reached up to clasp her arms. Don't be. I made my choice, and it was the right one. He turned in his chair to face her. You are the best decision I've ever made, Nia Wexler. The sound of her new name still gave Nia a thrill. And you're mine, Julian Wexler. Later that night, as they lay in bed, Julian turned to Nia with a thoughtful expression. I've been thinking about family, he said quietly. Because of your father's call? Nia asked. Julian nodded. Partly, but also because... He hesitated, then continued. Because I want us to have one. A real family. Nothing like what I grew up with. Nia's heart raced at his words. You mean children? Yes, Julian said, taking her hand. Not right away if you're not ready. I know you're still healing from your loss, and the bookstore is just getting started. But someday, I want to be a father. A real father, not like mine. Tears filled Nia's eyes. She had wanted children so badly with Marcus, had been devastated by the miscarriage, but the idea of having a family with Julian, a man who would love and cherish their children the way he loved and cherished her, filled her with joy. I want that too, she whispered. So much. Julian gathered her close, his arms strong and secure around her. We'll build the family neither of us had, he promised. Together. 3 months after their wedding, on a crisp December day, Harper Books and Brew opened its doors to the public. The renovations had transformed the old Bayside Books into a warm, inviting space with comfortable reading nooks, a cozy cafe area, and shelves filled with carefully curated titles. Nia had hired a small staff, 2 baristas for the cafe, and a retired English teacher to help with the book selection and special events. Julian had insisted on staying in the background, not wanting his name or wealth to overshadow Nia's achievement. This is your dream, he told her the night before the grand opening. You should be the face of it. The opening day exceeded all expectations. The local newspaper had run a feature on the new bookstore, highlighting Nia's background in non-profit work and her vision for a community gathering place. By noon, the cafe was full, and the shelves were already looking depleted. Nia moved through the store, greeting customers, recommending books, and basking in the realization of her dream. Julian watched from a corner table in the cafe, pride evident in his eyes whenever they met hers across the room. Late in the afternoon, as the initial rush slowed, the bell above the door chimed. Nia looked up from the register and froze. Richard Wexler stood in the entrance, impeccably dressed as always, surveying the store with calculating eyes. Julian noticed him at the same moment and rose from his seat, moving quickly to Nia's side. Father, he said, his voice controlled but tense. This is unexpected. Richard's gaze moved between them, then around the store. I was in Boston for business. Thought I'd see this venture for myself. Nia straightened her spine, determined not to be intimidated. Welcome to Harper Books and Brew, Mr. Wexler. Would you like a tour? Richard's eyebrow lifted slightly at her directness. Why not? I'm curious to see what my son has invested in. Nia's talent and vision is what I've invested in, Julian corrected firmly. The business speaks for itself. As Nia led Richard through the store, explaining the concept behind each section and the cafe menu, she was surprised to see something like reluctant approval in his expression. The financials are sound? He asked as they completed the tour. Very, Julian replied. Nia has a head for business as well as books. Richard nodded slowly. I see. He turned to Nia. You've created something respectable here, Ms. Harper, or I should say, Mrs. Wexler now. The acknowledgement, however grudging, caught Nia off guard. Thank you, she said simply. An awkward silence fell between them. Finally, Richard cleared his throat. I'll be in town for a few days. Perhaps dinner? At that seafood place near the harbor. Julian looked stunned by the invitation. You want to have dinner with us? Unless you're too busy, Richard said stiffly, a hint of his old arrogance returning. Julian glanced at Nia, who gave him a small nod. "Tomorrow night," he suggested. "The store closes at 6. 7 o'clock, Richard confirmed. "I'll make a reservation." He turned to go, then paused. "The store is impressive, as are you, Mrs. Wexler." With that surprising compliment, he left, the bell tinkling behind him. Julian turned to Nia, bewilderment clear on his face. "What just happened?" Nia smiled, squeezing his hand. "I think that might have been the closest thing to an apology your father is capable of making. Or a strategic retreat," Julian said skeptically. "My father doesn't change his mind easily." "Maybe not," Nia agreed. "But he came here, Julian. That's something." Julian nodded slowly. "It is. I just don't want to get my hopes up." "Whatever his motives," Nia said, "we'll face him together, just like we promised." The dinner the following night was awkward but civil. Richard asked pointed questions about the bookstore's business model, offering occasional suggestions that were actually useful. He inquired about Julian's company's latest project with what seemed like genuine interest. By dessert, a tentative truce had formed. Not friendship, not even true acceptance, but a beginning. "I still think you could have gotten more for the company," Richard said as they waited for the check. "But I suppose there's something to be said for building a legacy in your own way." Julian nodded, recognizing the closest thing to approval his father might ever offer. "There is." Richard's eyes moved to Nia. "And I underestimated you, Mrs. Wexler. You're not what I expected." "Life rarely gives us what we expect, Mr. Wexler," Nia replied with a small smile. "Sometimes it gives us what we need instead." A flicker of something, regret perhaps, crossed Richard's face. Indeed, they parted outside the restaurant with handshakes rather than embraces, but Julian seemed lighter as they drove home. "That went better than I anticipated," he admitted. Nia reached across to take his hand. "He's trying in his own way. That's a start." Julian nodded thoughtfully. "Not the relationship I wanted with my father as a child, but maybe something workable as adults." "Family is complicated," Nia said, "but worth the effort, I think." Julian squeezed her hand. "You're my family now, Nia. You and the life we're building together. Anything else is supplementary." As they rounded the curve in the road that revealed Seacliff Manor perched on its cliff, lights glowing warmly in the darkness, Nia felt a sense of homecoming that went beyond the physical structure. Home was Julian, and the love they had found in each other's broken places. Spring arrived in Maine with a burst of new life. The gardens at Seacliff bloomed with color, and the bookstore had established itself as a beloved community hub. Julian had gradually become more involved, hosting a monthly technology workshop for local teens that had proven surprisingly popular. "Who knew you had a talent for teaching?" Nia teased after watching him patiently explain coding basics to a group of enthralled high schoolers. Julian smiled, the expression now coming naturally to him. "I never had the opportunity to try before. There are many things I'm discovering about myself these days." One sunny morning in May, as they had breakfast on the terrace, Nia seemed unusually quiet. "Everything okay?" Julian asked, reaching for her hand across the table. Nia looked up at him, her eyes filled with emotion. "I have something to tell you." Julian's heart skipped a beat at her serious tone. "What is it?" Nia took a deep breath, then said, "I'm pregnant." Julian froze, his cup halfway to his lips. We're going to have a baby," Nia confirmed, tears of joy shining in her eyes. "I took the test this morning, then another, just to be sure." Julian set down his cup with a shaking hand. "A baby," he repeated, awe in his voice. "Are you happy?" Nia asked, a hint of nervousness in her tone. In answer, Julian rose from his chair and came around the table, pulling Nia to her feet and into his arms. "Happy doesn't begin to describe it," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Oh, Nia, I love you so much." He knelt before her, placing his hands gently on her still flat stomach. "And I already love you too, little one," he murmured. Sonita ran her fingers through his hair, her heart overflowing with love for this man who had overcome so much to open his heart to her, and now to their child. "I was worried," she admitted. After losing the last baby, Julian stood, taking her face in his hands. "This time is different," he said firmly. "We'll take every precaution, see the best doctors, and I'll be with you every step of the way." Nia nodded, leaning into his touch. "I know. That's what makes all the difference." The months that followed were filled with preparations and anticipation. One of the guest rooms was transformed into a nursery, painted a soft green that would work for any gender, as they had decided to be surprised. Julian threw himself into research, reading every book on pregnancy and childcare he could find. He attended every doctor's appointment, asking thoughtful questions and holding Nia's hand through each ultrasound. "He's going to be an amazing father," Nia's doctor commented after one visit, impressed by Julian's attentiveness. "Yes, he is," Nia agreed, watching as Julian studied the latest sonogram image with wonder. Even Richard showed a surprising interest in his future grandchild. He called more regularly, and though he maintained his formal demeanor, he sent extravagant gifts for the nursery and even asked about Nia's health during their conversations. "So will wonders never cease," Julian remarked after one such call. "My father asking about morning sickness." Nia smiled, rubbing her growing belly. "People can change, Julian. You did." Julian's expression softened as he placed his hand over hers. "Because of you." "No," Nia corrected gently. "You changed because you were brave enough to try. I just gave you a reason." As Nia's due date approached, Julian became increasingly protective, working entirely from home and rarely letting her out of his sight. Nia teased him about his hovering, but secretly loved his devotion. "The baby's room is ready. We have enough diapers to last a year, and Mrs. Finch has filled the freezer with meals," Julian said one evening as they sat in the library, Nia's feet in his lap as he massaged them. "Is there anything else we need?" Nia smiled, watching his strong hands work their magic on her swollen feet. "Just you," she said softly. "That's all we need." Julian looked up, his eyes meeting hers. "You'll always have me," he promised. "Both of you." 2 weeks before her due date, Nia woke in the middle of the night with a sharp pain. "Julian!" she gasped, gripping his arm. Julian was instantly alert. "Is it time?" Nia nodded, her face tense with pain. "I think so." What followed was a carefully orchestrated plan put into action. Julian called the doctor while helping Nia dress, then carried her to the car despite her protests that she could walk. "Humor me," he said, kissing her forehead as he settled her in the passenger seat. The drive to the hospital was tense but controlled, Julian maintaining a calm exterior despite his inner fear. This was so different from Nia's first pregnancy, which had ended in tragedy, but the shadow of that loss still lingered. "Everything will be fine," Nia said between contractions, reading his thoughts. "We're ready for this." Julian reached for her hand, squeezing gently. "Yes, we are." The labor was long but uncomplicated. Julian remained by Nia's side throughout, supporting her through each contraction, whispering encouragement, wiping her brow with cool cloths. "You're the strongest person I've ever known," he told her as the hours stretched on. "I'm in awe of you." Finally, as dawn broke over the horizon, their daughter entered the world with a healthy cry that brought tears to both their eyes. "She's perfect," Julian whispered, as the doctor placed the tiny, squirming bundle on Nia's chest. "Absolutely perfect." Nia looked down at their daughter through tears of joy. "Hello, Olivia," she murmured, using the name they had chosen if the baby was a girl. "We've been waiting for you." Julian perched on the edge of the bed, his arm around Nia, his other hand gently touching his daughter's tiny fingers. "Olivia Grace Wexler," he said, his voice filled with wonder. "Our miracle." As Olivia wrapped her tiny hand around Julian's finger, gripping with surprising strength, he felt the last pieces of his broken heart mend completely. This was what he had been missing all his life, not just Nia's love, but the family they were creating together. "Thank you," he whispered to Nia, his voice thick with emotion. "For what?" she asked, looking up from their daughter's face. "For not giving up on me," Julian said simply. "For seeing past the walls to the man beneath. For giving me everything I never knew I needed." Nia leaned against him, exhausted but radiantly happy. "We gave it to each other," she corrected, "and now to her." Later that day, as Nia rested, Julian stood by the window of the hospital room holding his daughter. Olivia slept peacefully in his arms, her tiny face relaxed in perfect trust. "I promise you'll never know the loneliness I did," he whispered to her. "You'll always know you're loved, always know you belong." He glanced over at Nia, sleeping soundly after her ordeal, and felt a wave of gratitude so intense it nearly overwhelmed him. From his isolated existence at Seacliff to this moment, holding his child while his wife slept nearby, seemed like a journey of 1,000 miles. Yet it had begun with a simple interview, a young woman from Brooklyn who needed a fresh start and wasn't intimidated by his coldness. When they brought Olivia home to Seacliff 3 days later, the house felt different, warmer, more alive. Mrs. Finch cried openly when she first held the baby, declaring her the most beautiful child ever born. "She looks like both of you," the older woman said, marveling at Olivia's delicate features. "Your eyes, Julian, and Nia's mouth. Perfect. As they settled into life with a newborn, Julian surprised Nia with his natural ability with the baby. He took night feedings without complaint, changed diapers with increasing skill, and could soothe Olivia to sleep when no one else could. "You're a natural," Nia observed one evening, watching Julian rock their daughter gently in the nursery. Julian looked up with a smile. "She makes it easy," he said. "She's so trusting, so open. No walls, no defenses. Like her father has become," Nia said softly, coming to stand beside them. Julian nodded thoughtfully. "I want her to stay this way, open to love, unafraid of connection." "She will," Nia promised, "because she has us to show her how." 1 month after Olivia's birth, they received an unexpected visitor. Richard Wexler's car pulled up the drive one Sunday afternoon, unannounced. Julian met him at the door, Olivia cradled against his shoulder. "Father," he said, surprise evident in his voice, "we weren't expecting you." Richard looked uncharacteristically uncertain as his eyes fell on his granddaughter. "I was in Boston again," he said, his usual excuse. "Thought I might see the baby." Julian hesitated only briefly before stepping back. "Come in. Nia's just making tea." As they entered the living room, Nia looked up in surprise from the tea tray she was arranging. "Mr. Wexler," she said, straightening, "this is unexpected." Richard nodded awkwardly. "I apologize for not calling ahead." "It's fine," Julian said, gesturing to a chair. "Would you like to hold her?" Richard looked startled by the offer. It's been many years since I held an infant." "It comes back to you," Julian said, already moving to place Olivia in his father's arms before he could refuse. Richard stiffened initially as Julian carefully transferred the baby, but his expression changed as Olivia blinked up at him with her dark eyes. Julian's eyes. "She's..." Richard began, then cleared his throat. "She's beautiful." "Yes, she is," Nia agreed, sitting across from him. "Would you like some tea, Mr. Wexler?" Richard nodded, not taking his eyes off his granddaughter. "Richard, please," he said quietly. "Under the circumstances." Nia and Julian exchanged surprised glances at this unexpected thawing. "Richard, then," Nia agreed. As they had tea, with Olivia contentedly nestled in her grandfather's arms, the conversation was easier than it had ever been. Richard asked about the birth, the bookstore, Julian's latest projects. For once there was no agenda, no manipulation, just a grandfather meeting his granddaughter for the first time. When it was time for him to leave, Richard seemed reluctant to hand Olivia back. "She's quite extraordinary," he said, carefully returning her to Julian's arms. "Takes after her mother, I'd say. And her father," Nia added firmly. Richard looked at Julian holding his daughter, a softness in his expression that neither had seen before. "Yes," he agreed quietly. "And her father." At the door, Richard hesitated. "I'm considering spending more time in the States," he said, trying to sound casual. "Opening a Boston office. I'd be nearby, if that would be acceptable." Julian smiled, understanding what his father couldn't quite say. "We'd like that," he said simply. "Olivia should know her grandfather." Something like gratitude flashed across Richard's face before his usual composure returned. "Good. I'll be in touch about arrangements." After he left, Julian and Nia stood on the porch, watching his car disappear down the drive. "Well," Nia said, leaning against Julian's side. "That was unexpected." Julian nodded, looking down at Olivia sleeping peacefully in his arms. "She's already working miracles, our daughter." "Like mother, like daughter," Nia teased gently. Julian turned to her, his expression serious. "You did work a miracle, Nia, on me." Nia shook her head. "We worked it together, two broken people finding wholeness in each other." Julian leaned down to kiss her softly. "The first touch of devotion," he murmured against her lips. "That's what you gave me. The first time someone touched me with genuine care, not wanting anything in return." "And now?" Nia asked, her arms encircling both him and their daughter. Julian smiled, his eyes filled with a peace that had once seemed impossible. "Now I know that touch is just the beginning, that love deepens with time, with trust, with shared joy and sorrow." As they stood on the porch of Seacliff Manor, the family Julian had never dared to dream of, the future stretched before them, bright with promise, rich with love. The man who had once feared intimacy now embraced it fully, finding in vulnerability not weakness but his greatest strength. "I love you," Julian whispered to Nia, the words coming easily now after months of practice. "You and Olivia are everything to me." "And you to us," Nia replied, standing on tiptoe to kiss him again. "Always." Inside the house that had once echoed with loneliness, laughter now filled the rooms, Where silence had reigned, a baby's cries and coos created a new music, and where a man had once hidden behind walls of his own making, a family now thrived in the open spaces of a heart, finally fully healed. But the end